You rise without hurry, pushing back the blanket and placing your bare feet on the cool wooden floorboards that are smooth from years of footsteps. The air is cool but not cold, carrying the particular dampness of a city built on water, a smell of stone and mud, and the faint salt of the lagoon that enters every room. You walk the few steps to the small table that serves as your washstand, a plain piece of furniture with a ceramic basin and a pitcher of water that you filled the night before from the cistern in the courtyard. Pouring water into the basin, the sound is a gentle splash followed by a trickle that quickly fades, and you dip both hands in, cupping the cool liquid and bringing it to your face. The water is bracing in a quiet way, chasing away the last soft edges of sleep, and you use a square of rough linen to dry your cheeks, your forehead, the back of your neck, each motion slow and deliberate. There is no mirror in this room, no need to examine your reflection, for your appearance is meant to be forgettable. A man of average height and plain features who could be a clerk or a small trader and never invites a second glance. You dress in the dim light, pulling on a simple shirt of unbleached linen that falls loosely around you before tucking it into a pair of brown woolen hose that reach just below the knee. Over this goes a doublet of dark grey wool. Its laces tied with the ease of long habit, the garment neither too fine nor too shabby. Exactly the sort of clothing a copyist or a modest bookkeeper might wear. Your shoes are soft leather, well made but unadorned, with soles that have been stitched and restitched so that your footsteps make almost no sound on stone. This matters for your work, though as you dress there is no sense of urgency or secrecy, only the ordinary rhythm of a man preparing for his day. You adjust the collar of your shirt and smooth the front of the doublet with flat palms, the wool slightly rough under your fingers, and then you turn towards the corner of the room where a small writing desk stands beneath the high window. The desk is a plain board supported by two trestles, its surface marked with ink stains and the faint scratches of a quill, and upon it sits a single candle in a brass holder, a clay ink pot, a few trimmed quills, and a small knife. But you do not go to the desk yet. Instead you cross to the wall beside the bed, where the plaster is old and faintly cracked, and you count the bricks from the corner with your fingertips, a soft brushing touch that knows exactly where to find the one loose brick near the floor. The brick shifts with a gentle scrape when you press it, sliding out of its bed to reveal a hollow space no larger than your two hands together. Inside lies a slip of parchment, folded twice, small enough to hide in a palm. You take it out and replace the brick, pressing it back until it sits flush with the wall, invisible to any eye that did not know to look. The parchment feels dry and slightly stiff between your fingers, and you carry it to the desk, sitting on the simple wooden stool with the same quiet care you bring to everything. Now you light the candle. You take up the flint and steel that lie beside the ink pot, striking them together once, twice, until a spark catches the charred cloth of the tinder, a tiny orange glow that you nurse with a gentle breath. The wick catches and a small flame rises, trembling for a moment before steadying into a still tongue of golden light. The candle is made of beeswax, a small luxury you allow yourself because its light is cleaner and its scent sweeter than the tallow candles used by most, and as it burns it fills the room with a faint honeyed warmth that mixes with the cool damp of the stone. The flame illuminates the desk, throwing soft shadows against the wall, and you unfold the slip of parchment, smoothing it flat with the heel of your hand. The message is written in a cipher you have used for many months now, a system of simple merchant's marks that at a glance appears to be nothing more than an inventory of dyed cloth. There are symbols for bales of wool, for ounces of crimson dye, for ells of blue silk, all arranged in neat rows as if a trader had taken stock of his wares. But beneath these marks lies a different meaning, one that you can read as easily as the printed prayers in a missal. The message tells you of a ship that has arrived at the Molo, a small trading vessel from the Levant, carrying not only spices, but also certain passengers whose presence in the city is of quiet interest to those who employ you. There is no name, no detail that would be dangerous if the paper fell into the wrong hands, only a confirmation that the expected arrival has occurred. You read it once, twice, letting the information settle into your memory, and then you hold the corner of the parchment to the candle flame. The paper catches fire with a soft whoosh, the flame turning blue at its edges as it consumes the dry fibers, and you watch it curl and blacken, the ash falling into a small clay pot you keep for this purpose. The light of the burning paper flickers bright for a heartbeat before dying back, and you crush the remaining ash into a fine dark powder with the tip of the small knife, stirring it into the pot where it mingles with the ash of a dozen other messages that came before. There is no smoke, only the faint acrid smell of burnt parchment that quickly dissipates, swallowed by the honey scent of the beeswax candle. You sit for a moment, the stool creaking slightly under your weight, and listen to the city outside the window. The sounds are still thin and scattered, the earliest notes of a waking Venice. From somewhere to the east comes the tolling of the Marangona, the great bell in the campanile of San Marco, its deep bronze voice rolling across the rooftops to announce the first hour of daylight. Other bells answer from smaller churches, the bells of San Giacomo di Rialto and San Giovanni Elemosinario, their tones overlapping in a complex pattern that rises and falls like breath. The bells ring for a short while and then stop, leaving a silence that seems deeper than before, a silence filled only by the ever-present whisper of water moving through the canals. You take a new candle from a small wooden box on the desk, a fresh beeswax taper that is smooth and slightly cool to the touch. The wick needs trimming, its end frayed from storage, and you pick up the small knife, its blade thin and sharp from careful wetting. You hold the wick between thumb and forefinger, drawing the blade across it with a single smooth motion that cuts the blackened tip away, leaving a clean white point. The trimmed bit of wick falls into the clay pot with the ash, and you set the new candle in the brass holder beside the one already burning, pushing it gently into the socket until it stands straight. Later you will need it, when this candle has burned down and the work requires a fresh light, but for now it simply waits, a pale column of wax reflecting the flame's soft glow. Your next task is to prepare a reply, and for this you take a fresh scrap of paper from the small stack at the back of the desk. The paper is of modest quality, slightly rough, with tiny flecks of fiber visible in its surface, the kind of paper a merchant might use for his daily accounts. You dip a quill into the inkpot, tapping the excess ink against the rim with a tiny tick sound, and you begin to write, not in the cipher, but in plain script, a short note that appears to be a list of grocery items: a pound of rice, 4 ounces of cinnamon, a flask of olive oil, a wedge of Parmesan cheese. The words flow from the quill in a neat, unremarkable hand, but the order of the items and the particular quantities encode a simple message of your own, a confirmation that you have received the news and will proceed with the news and will proceed with the next step in the chain. The quill scratches softly across the paper, a dry whisper that is the loudest sound in the room, and when you finish you blot the ink with a sprinkling of fine sand from a small dish, shaking the excess back into the dish before folding the paper into a tight square. To seal the message, you take a stick of red wax and hold it to the candle flame, turning it slowly so that it melts evenly. The wax softens and begins to drip, a single bright drop falling onto the folded edge of the paper, and you catch more drops until a small pool of molten red has formed, about the size of a fingertip. You set the wax stick aside and press your thumb into the pool, not using a signet ring that might be traced, but simply leaving a plain, smooth impression that tells no secrets. The wax cools quickly, turning from glossy liquid to matte solid in the space of a few breaths, and you test the seal with a gentle press, feeling it firm and secure. The message is now ready to be passed on, though that will come later in the morning, after you have broken your fast. You rise from the stool and stretch your arms above your head, feeling the slight pull in your shoulders from a night spent on the straw mattress, and you move to the small cupboard near the door where you keep your simple provisions. The cupboard holds a loaf of day-old bread, wrapped in a clean cloth, a small wheel of hard cheese, a clay jug of watered wine, and a few dried figs in a wooden bowl. You take the bread and break off a piece the size of your fist, its crust crackling pleasantly, the inside still soft enough to chew without effort. You cut a thin slice of cheese with the small knife, the blade passing through the firm yellow curd with a slight resistance, and you eat standing by the window, looking out at the narrow slice of Venice that is visible from this height. The sky is slowly brightening now, turning from grey to a pale pearl colour, and the rooftops across the canal are taking on their daytime colours. The red-brown of terracotta tiles, the warm ochre of plastered walls, the dark green of a potted herb on a windowsill. You take a sip of the watered wine, which is more water than wine, cool and faintly tart, enough to wet your throat after the dryness of sleep. As you eat, you let your attention drift across the sounds of the morning. A boatman passes in the canal below, his single oar making a rhythmic creak against the oarlock, a sound that approaches and then fades as he moves along the waterway, a man beginning his day's work just as you are beginning yours. A seagull calls once, a sharp cry that cuts through the stillness and then is gone, and you see the bird glide across the narrow strip of sky, its white wings catching the first true light of the sun that has not yet risen above the rooftops. The bookseller's shop beneath you is still quiet, but soon it will open and the day's small commerce will begin. The buying and selling of printed books and manuscripts, a trade that provides the perfect cover for a man like you who needs to come and go without drawing notice. The bread and cheese are finished, the wine drunk, and you wipe your fingers on a small cloth that hangs by the washstand before returning to the desk. You place the sealed message into a hidden pocket sewn inside the cuff of your left sleeve, a narrow pouch that lies flat against your wrist and cannot be seen unless the sleeve is turned inside out. The message sits there securely, a slight stiffness against your skin that you will forget within minutes. You then survey the room with a slow, methodical gaze, checking that everything is in its proper place, the ash pot on the desk, the quills aligned, the ink pot closed, the second candle waiting, the loose brick firmly seated in the wall. Nothing reveals the true purpose of this room, which appears to be the modest quarters of a solitary clerk with a taste for simple order. That is the intention, and you maintain it with the same quiet care that you bring to the messages themselves. The light through the window is stronger now, the grey of dawn giving way to a soft gold as the sun begins to climb above the Adriatic to the east. You can see the dust motes floating in the beam of light that falls across the desk, tiny specks that drift lazily in the still air, and you watch them for a moment without thought, your mind as calm and empty as the surface of a canal at slack tide. The candle still burns beside you, its flame almost invisible in the increasing daylight, and you bend down to blow it out with a single soft breath that makes the flame flicker and vanish, a thin trail of smoke rising from the wick before dissipating. The room smells of warm wax and cool stone and the faint salt of the lagoon, and you stand there for a long moment, feeling the floorboards solid beneath your feet, the air gentle on your face, the weight of the message a quiet presence against your wrist. Then you move to the door, a simple wooden door with iron hinges that you oil regularly so that they never creak, and you lift the latch with a careful hand. The door opens onto a narrow staircase that spirals down to a side alley, a private entrance that the bookseller allows you to use in exchange for your occasional help with his ledgers. You step through and pull the door closed behind you, hearing the latch click into place with a soft, final sound, and you begin the slow descent into the waking city, your soft leather shoes quiet on the warm stone steps, your breath steady and slow, your thoughts already turning to the morning walk that will carry the message to its next hidden place. The staircase spirals downward in a tight coil of worn stone steps, each one slightly hollowed in the center from centuries of use. Your soft leather shoes make a faint brushing sound as you descend, a whisper against the ancient stone that is too quiet to echo. The walls are close and cool, their surfaces rough with old plaster that has crumbled in places to reveal the brick beneath, and the air in the stairwell carries the scent of damp mineral and the faint, distant smell of the canal outside. You keep one hand lightly on the wall for balance, feeling the stones chill under your fingertips, the texture of tiny pits and ridges that speak of age and weather. There is no window in this narrow passage, but a thin grey light filters up from the bottom where the alley door stands open, a crack, a vertical line of pale morning that grows brighter with each step. At the bottom you pause and push the door gently, its iron hinges swinging without a sound thanks to the oil you applied only last week. The alley outside is narrow and shadowed, a deep canyon between tall buildings that blocks the direct sun for most of the day. You step out and close the door behind you, hearing the latch engage with a soft click, and then you stand for a moment adjusting to the open air. The sky above is a ribbon of soft blue, visible only as a stripe between the overhanging eaves, and the ground beneath your feet is paved with flagstones that are dark with moisture, the joints between them filled with a thin green moss that thrives in the perpetual damp. The alley smells of wet stone and the sea, a clean, mineral scent that is the signature of Venice herself, and somewhere nearby, a gutter drips with a slow, rhythmic sound, each drop falling into a puddle with a tiny plink that marks time like a patient metronome. You turn left and begin to walk, your bag empty and folded under your arm, the hidden message a slight stiffness against your wrist. The alley runs straight for perhaps 50 paces before bending sharply around the apse of an old church, its brickwork buttressed and dark, and as you round the corner, the city opens slightly. You are now in a slightly wider canal, though still narrow enough that you could touch both walls if you stretched out your arms. Here there are doorways set into the stone, their wooden doors closed and studded with iron nails, and above them, small windows with wooden shutters that are mostly still latched. From one open window on an upper floor, you hear the sound of a woman humming, a soft, tuneless melody that drifts down like a thread of smoke, and then a baby coughs once before falling silent. You pass beneath a line of laundry strung between two buildings, shirts and sheets hanging motionless in the still air, their colors muted to shades of grey and cream in the shadowed light, the fabric occasionally brushing against itself with a whisper too faint to be called a sound. Your pace is slow and even, a steady walk that does not hurry, for haste draws eyes and you have no need to draw eyes. The leather of your shoes meets the stone with a soft, repeated tap, the sound blending into the background noise of the city that is growing richer as the morning advances. You hear the distant cry of a fish seller somewhere towards the Grand Canal, a long melodic call that rises and falls, advertising the morning's catch in a voice roughened by salt air. Somewhere a dove barks twice and then is quiet, and the cooing of pigeons on a rooftop ledge adds a low, bubbling undertone. The air temperature is cool but not cold, a gentle freshness that fills your lungs with each breath, and you let your gaze drift across the passing walls, noting without thought the details that make up the fabric of this city. A small shrine to the Virgin set into a niche, its candle flame a tiny point of gold in the gloom. A cat curled on a doorstep, one eye opening a slit as you pass before closing again. A heap of empty oyster shells piled against a wall, their inner surfaces catching the light with the forbidden. You come to a small bridge, one of the hundreds that stitch the islands of Venice together, its arch rising gently over a narrow canal. The bridge has no railings, only low stone curbs worn smooth by countless hands over the centuries, and you walk up its gentle slope with the same unhurried pace. At the top, you pause for a moment, not stopping, but simply slowing, your eyes traveling along the canal's green water. A sondolo is tied to a striped pole below, its hull painted black and its single oar shipped, the boat rocking almost imperceptibly with the movement of the water. The canal reflects the buildings on either side, their plaster walls and terracotta roofs wavering in the water like a slow, liquid painting, and a seagull stands on the boat's prow, its white body bright against the dark wood. You watch the seagull preen a wing feather, drawing it through its beak with a delicate, precise motion, and then you continue down the other side of the bridge, your footsteps echoing slightly on the stone before returning to the muffled sound of the alley beyond. Now the character of the neighborhood begins to change as you draw closer to the Rialto market. The alleys widen into small campi, open squares with central wells where servants and housemaids are already gathering with copper buckets, their voices a soft murmur of morning greetings. You pass a bakery, its street-level window an open arch through which you can see the baker himself, a man dusted with flour, sliding a long wooden peel into a domed brick oven. The smell of baking bread pours out into the street, warm and yeasty and slightly sweet, and you inhale it without altering your stride. The baker does not look up, and you do not pause. A few more steps and you pass a cobbler's shop, its door propped open with a wooden last, and inside an old man in a leather apron is already at work, tapping tiny nails into the sole of a shoe with a hammer that makes a series of short, sharp sounds, a staccato rhythm that ceases as you pass and then resumes. The city is a patchwork of these small industries, each person absorbed in their own quiet labor, and you move among them like a fish through water, unremarkable and unseen. You turn into a covered passageway, a sottoportego that cuts through the ground floor of a palazzo, its ceiling low and arched, the brickwork blackened by centuries of torch smoke. The passage is dark after the open air, and your eyes adjust slowly, taking in the details. A heavy wooden door on one side with ornate iron hinges, a small stone bench built into the wall, a stray cat that blinks at you from the shadows before darting away. The ground underfoot changes from flagstone to terracotta tile, and your footsteps take on a slightly different quality, a sharper tap that echoes briefly in the enclosed space. At the far end, the passage opens onto the edge of the herbaria, the vegetable and herb market that spreads along the bank of the Grand Canal. The light here is suddenly brighter, the open sky above the canal allowing the morning sun to flood the scene with a pale gold wash. You step out of the passage and into the market, and the world expands into color and sound. The stalls are simple wooden tables covered with rough canvas awnings that flap gently in the breeze from the water, and the produce is laid out in neat arrangements that catch the eye. There are mounds of deep green cabbages with their outer leaves spread like petals, pyramids of yellow onions, bundles of carrots with their feathery tops still attached and bright orange from a recent washing. Turnips rest in wooden crates, their purple and white skins glistening with moisture, and baskets of herbs release their fragrances into the air. The sharp sweetness of basil, the resinous scent of rosemary, the clean, cool smell of mint. You walk slowly among the stalls, your canvas bag now open in your hand, and you pause occasionally to examine the goods with the unhurried consideration of a careful shopper. Your fingers brush a bunch of thyme, feeling the tiny leaves that are slightly fuzzy to the touch, and you lift it to your nose for a moment, inhaling the earthy, slightly medicinal fragrance before setting it down. The sounds of the market are a gentle hubbub, not loud or chaotic, but a steady hum of human voices conducting the small transactions of daily life. A woman in a grey shawl haggles softly with a vendor over the price of artichokes, her voice a low, melodic negotiation that rises and falls without heat. A man carrying a basket of eels walks past, the creatures glistening and writhing slowly, and the smell of the canal and fish mingles with the vegetable scents. Somewhere a child laughs, a high, bright sound that cuts through the murmur and then fades, and the bells of San Giacomo di Rialto begin to ring the mid-morning hour, their deep bronze notes rolling across the market like a wave. You continue your slow circuit, your eyes moving from stall to stall without lingering too long on anyone, and gradually you make your way towards the far end of the market where the herb sellers have their tables. Here the stalls are smaller and more specialized, run mostly by older women in dark dresses and white caps, their hands weathered and stained from a lifetime of working with plants. Dried herbs hang in bundles from the awning poles, sage and marjoram and oregano, their leaves crinkled and faded to a dusty green, and the air around these stalls is a concentrated perfume, a blend of a dozen different dried botanicals that is both sharp and soothing. You stop at the stall of a woman you have come to know over many months, an old woman with a face as wrinkled as a dried apple and eyes that are sharp and clear. She does not smile or greet you by name, for you are not customers who know each other beyond the simple exchange of coins for herbs. But she nods once, a tiny inclination of her head that is the only acknowledgement you need. Her stall is a trestle table, covered with a clean but frayed linen cloth, and on it she has arranged her wares in small wooden compartments. There is marjoram in one, its tiny grey-green leaves, soft and downy, sage in another, the leaves broad and velvety, and rosemary, the spiky branches bristling with needle-like leaves that release their sharp, piney scent when touched. At the back of the stall, against the wall, a wooden shelf holds jars of dried lavender, chamomile flowers, and dried rose petals, their colors muted to soft purples and pale pinks. You reach out and pick up a bunch of rosemary, turning it over in your hands, feeling the stiff stems and the rough texture of the leaves. As you examine the rosemary, your other hand moves to the edge of the stall, where the wooden frame has a small crack that has been there for weeks, a narrow gap where the boards have shrunk with age. Your fingers find the crack without looking, and the folded message slips from your sleeve into the gap with a tiny, silent motion, disappearing into the dark space behind the wood. The old woman does not react. She is weighing out chamomile for another customer, her attention on the small brass scales that balance with a delicate tremor. The drop is complete, as unremarkable as brushing a fly from your sleeve. You spend a few more moments examining the herbs, your hands moving from the rosemary to a small bundle of dried lavender tied with a strip of raffia. You lift it to your nose, inhaling the sweet floral fragrance that is said to calm the mind and aid sleep, and you nod slightly, a silent decision. You take a small copper coin from the pouch at your belt, a single soldo, and place it on the counter. The old woman sweeps the coin into her apron pocket with a practiced motion and gives another small nod, and you place the lavender into your canvas bag. The transaction is complete, as ordinary as 1,000 others that happen in this market every day, and you turn away from the stall, the bag now holding a legitimate purchase that explains your presence here should anyone ever ask. You walk back through the market by a different path, threading your way between the stalls as the morning crowds begin to thicken. Servants with baskets over their arms, merchants in fur-trimmed cloaks, a priest in a black cassock, a group of sailors with their hair tied back and their faces browned by the sun, all moving through the market with their own purposes. The sun is higher now, the light losing its early softness and turning sharper, and the shadows under the awnings are crisp and dark. You pause at a stall selling fresh cheese, and purchase a small round of soft white cheese wrapped in a grape leaf, adding it to your bag beside the lavender, another small detail of ordinary life. The cheese is cool and slightly damp through the leaf, and you cradle it carefully as you resume your walk. Leaving the market, you turn along the edge of the Grand Canal, walking on the wide fondamenta where the water laps directly against the stone embankment. The canal is busy now, a watery thoroughfare of boats both large and small, gondolas with their curved prows and silver ornaments, flat-bottomed barges loaded with timber and barrels, a pater with its striped sail hanging slack in the light breeze, a dozen smaller craft darting between them like water beetles. The oarsmen call to one another in the Venetian dialect, their voices carrying across the water with a musical lilt, and the smell of the canal is a mixture of salt water and mud, and the faint, not unpleasant scent of decaying vegetation. You walk slowly, one hand resting on the stone balustrade, feeling the rough texture of the stone under your palm. The water moves in a constant, gentle undulation, its surface a shifting mosaic of reflected sky and buildings and the dark shapes of boats, and you watch a single leaf spiral down from an overhanging tree, landing on the water with the lightest of touches before drifting away with the current. Your path takes you past the grand facades of palazzi, their arched windows and ornate balconies, speaking of wealth and power, but you do not linger on their details. Your attention is on the simpler things. The pattern of iron rings set into the stone for mooring boats, the green algae that marks the waterline, the way the sunlight catches the ripples and scatters into 1,000 points of light. After a while, you turn away from the Grand Canal into a quieter side canal, the Rio, where the buildings press closer and the water is darker and stiller, a mirror of deep green that barely moves. Here the sounds of the market fade into the distance, replaced by the quiet slap of water against stone, the creak of a moored boat, the distant cry of a gull. You walk along the narrow path beside the Rio, your footsteps once again the only human sound, and you feel the calm settle over you like a familiar cloak. The bag in your hand sways gently with your stride, the lavender and cheese shifting slightly, and you think about the message now hidden in the crack of the stall. By midday, it will be collected by the next link in the chain, a person you have never met and never will meet. A person who will carry it to its destination with the same quiet care you have brought to your own part. You do not know what the message ultimately serves. Nor do you need to know. Your role is simply to be a courier, a quiet man who walks through the city and leaves small things in small places. The thought does not trouble you or excite you, it simply is, like the water flowing under the bridge or the bells ringing the hours. You continue walking, your steady pace eating up the distance, and gradually the familiar landmarks of your own neighborhood begin to appear. The baker's shop with its domed oven, the cobbler tapping his nails, the alley with the laundry strung overhead. The city has woken fully now, but you move through it with the same quiet invisibility as when you left. A man carrying a bag of groceries, returning home after a morning's shopping, with nothing to mark him as anything other than ordinary. You reach the side door of the bookseller's shop and let yourself in, the latch lifting smoothly under your hand, and you climb the spiral staircase again, your legs moving with the automatic memory of the steps. The room at the top is exactly as you left it, the candle cold in its holder, the ink pot closed, the ash pot still on the desk. You place the bag on the table and take out the lavender and the cheese, setting them beside the stack of paper. The lavender you will hang from a nail by the window to dry further, its scent perfuming the small room for weeks to come. The cheese you will eat later with the remaining bread. For now, you sit on the stool and look out the high window at the strip of sky, watching the clouds drift slowly across the blue, their shapes soft and changing, and you let the morning settle into memory, a quiet passage of time that has moved you another small step along the hidden path you walk every day. The scriptorium lies just around the corner from the church of San Giacomo di Rialto, a low stone building that was once a warehouse for salt and now houses the quiet business of writing. You reach it after the morning walk, the lavender still swinging in your bag, the cheese wrapped and put away, and you enter by a side door that opens directly into the long narrow room where the copyists work. The door is heavy oak, its iron handle worn to a smooth polish, and when you push it open a small bell above the lintel gives a single dull clink, a sound so familiar that no one in the room even looks up. The air inside is noticeably warmer than the street, heated by the bodies of the scribes and the steady flame of the tallow candles that burn on every desk, and it carries a complex smell that you have long associated with the quiet hours of midday, the fatty, slightly smoky scent of burning tallow, the sharp mineral tang of ink, the musty sweetness of old paper, and underneath it all, the cool, damp breath of the stone walls that never quite dry out. You close the door behind you, and the outside world fades to a murmur. The room stretches away from you in a long rectangle, its ceiling low and beamed with dark timber that has been stained by centuries of candle smoke. There are no windows at street level, for this was a storeroom built to keep its contents cool and dry, but high up near the ceiling, a row of small arched openings admits a thin, grey light that filters down through the smoky air like light through deep water. The desks are simple sloping boards set on trestles, spaced evenly along both walls, and at each desk sits a copyist bent over his work, the soft scratching of quills filling the silence like the sound of insects in summer grass. The only other light comes from the candles. On every desk a brass or pewter holder with a thick tallow candle that burns with a yellow, unsteady flame, and the combined glow of all these small lights casts a warm, honey-colored illumination that picks out the details of the room in soft relief. You walk to your usual desk, the third one along the left wall, a place that has become yours through habit and the quiet arrangement of the senior notary who runs the scriptorium. The surface of the desk is scarred with the scratches and ink stains of decades, a palimpsest of other men's labor that you add to each day without thinking. You set down your canvas bag beside the stool and settle yourself, adjusting the position of the candle holder so that the flame falls at the right angle, then reaching for the small leather pouch that holds your personal tools, a quill knife, a bone folder, a pumice stone for smoothing the vellum, and a small agate burnisher. The pouch is soft from handling, its drawstring pulling open with a quiet hiss. The first task of the afternoon is to prepare fresh ink, for the ink pot on your desk is nearly dry. You rise again and walk to the supply table at the far end of the room, where the raw materials are kept in earthenware jars and wooden boxes. The senior notary, a man named Maestro Bertucci, sits near this table in a large chair with a high back, his chin resting on his chest and his eyes closed, a thin line of drool tracing a path from the corner of his mouth to the edge of his collar. He's an old man now, his hands too unsteady for the fine work, but his presence lends the scriptorium a certain legitimacy, and he dozes away most afternoons in perfect peace. You step quietly past him and gather what you need, a small handful of oak galls from a clay pot, their surfaces wrinkled and hard like tiny dark brains, a cup of rainwater that has been left to stand in a stone cistern and is cool and clear, a block of iron sulfate, its crystals a pale poisonous green, and a lump of gum arabic that glistens like amber. You carry these back to your desk in your cupped hands, the oak galls rattling softly against each other. At your desk you set out the ingredients and take up the small marble mortar and pestle that wait at the corner. You drop 3 of the oak galls into the mortar, their hard shells clinking against the stone, and begin to grind them with a slow circular motion of the pestle. The grinding makes a low gritty sound, a crunch and scrape that repeats with each turn, and gradually the galls break down into smaller fragments, then into a coarse powder the color of cinnamon. You continue grinding, your wrist moving in the same steady circle until the powder is as fine as you can make it, a soft brown dust that clings to the sides of the mortar. You tip the powder into a small ceramic bowl and add a splash of the rainwater, stirring it with a thin wooden stick until the water turns a murky brown. Then you take the block of iron sulfate and scrape a few shavings into the mixture with the edge of your quill knife, the pale green crystals dissolving quickly and turning the liquid a much darker shade. The chemical reaction happens silently, a slow transformation that deepens the color from weak tea to rich, dark brown. Finally, you add a tiny bead of gum arabic, stirring it in to give the ink a slight gloss and to help it flow smoothly from the quill. The finished ink has a faintly acrid smell, like wet bark and old metal, a smell that rises from the bowl and mingles with the tallow smoke in the air. You pour the new ink into your ink pot, filling it almost to the brim, and set the bowl aside to be cleaned later. With the ink prepared, you select a sheet of vellum from the stack at the back of your desk. The vellum is smooth and slightly glossy, the color of pale cream, made from the skin of a calf that has been scraped and stretched and burnished until it is as thin and even as fine cloth. You run your hand over the surface, feeling its cool, velvety texture, and you check for any rough spots that might catch the quill. There is one tiny bump near the bottom edge, and you take your pumice stone and rub it gently in a small circle, the stone making a soft, sandy hiss against the vellum until the spot is smooth. Then you dust away the powder with a soft brush made of squirrel hair, its bristles flicking lightly over the surface, and you place the sheet on the sloping board, weighting down the top corners with 2 small lead weights wrapped in leather. The word today is a bill of lading for a shipment of English wool from the port of Bruges, a document that must be copied out 3 times for the merchant, the ship's master, and the customs house at the Doggone. The original, a rough draft written on sheet paper, is pinned to the left side of your desk by a small nail. You read the first line, your eyes tracing the clerk's hurried script, and then you dip your quill into the fresh ink, tapping the nib twice against the rim of the ink pot to shake off the excess. The quill is a goose feather, its shaft stripped of barbs except at the very tip, and it has been trimmed to a fine point that writes a clean, narrow line. You lower the nib to the vellum and begin to write. The scratching of the quill is a soft, regular sound, a dry whisper that joins the chorus of other quills in the room. You form each letter with care, the strokes flowing from your hand in a practiced rhythm, the downstroke of the capital letter, the curve of the minuscule, the tiny serif that finishes each line. The ink flows from the nib in a wet, dark line that dries almost instantly on the absorbent vellum, leaving a permanent mark that will last for centuries. You write the date, the name of the ship, the description of the cargo, 12 bales of finest English wool, shorn from Cotswold sheep, packed in canvas and bound with hemp rope. Each word is an act of attention, your mind fully absorbed in the shapes you are making, and as the hour passes, you slip into a state of calm concentration that is almost like sleep. A waking rest where nothing exists but the movement of the quill across the page. Beside you, 2 desks away, a young man named Niccolo is trimming quills. He is an apprentice, perhaps 16 years old, with thin wrists and a serious face, and his task today is to prepare a bundle of fresh quills for the copyists to use. You are aware of him in your peripheral vision, a quiet presence that you have grown used to over many afternoons. He holds each quill up to the candlelight first, checking for flaws in the shaft, then he cuts the tip at an angle with a small sharp knife, the blade making a crisp snip that cuts through the silence. After the angle cut, he makes a second slit down the center of the nib, a delicate operation that requires a steady hand, and then he scrapes the cut edges with the flat of the blade to remove any roughness. Each quill takes about the time of 100 slow heartbeats, and the snipping sound repeats in a comfortable rhythm that becomes part of the background, a periodic punctuation that marks the passing minutes without intruding on your concentration. You glance at him once and see that his tongue is poking out slightly from the corner of his mouth, a childhood habit of focus, and then you return your eyes to the vellum. The bill of lading grows line by line. You complete the description of the cargo and move on to the terms of shipping, the freight charges, the insurance rate, the name of the agent in Venice who will receive the bales. The quill scratches on, its path across the page as steady as a small boat crossing a calm canal. When the ink in the nib runs low, the line begins to thin and fade, and you dip the quill again, the tip plunging into the dark pool of ink and coming up glistening, and you tap once, twice, a tiny neat motion that keeps the ink from blotting. The repetition of this action is a comfort, a small cycle that your body performs without thought, and your mind is free to drift in a calm, wordless way across the quiet landscape of the room. The only interruption comes halfway through the second copy. The door opens with a creak, and the little bell clinks, and a thin man in a dusty black doublet steps inside, carrying a folded paper. He is a servant from one of the merchant houses, a familiar face, and he nods to Maestro Bertucci, who has woken briefly and is now sipping a cup of something from a clay mug. The servant hands the paper to the maestro, speaks a few words in a low voice, and then leaves, the door closing behind him with the same creak and clink. Maestro Bertucci reads the paper, his lips moving slightly, and then he rises from his chair with a groaning of old bones and shuffles across the room to your desk. He places the paper beside your elbow without ceremony, saying only, "A prayer to copy," when you have finished the wool. And then he returns to his chair, settling back into his doze with a long, slow exhalation. You glance at the paper. It is a list of Latin prayers, written in a hand that is neat but unremarkable, a Pater Noster, an Ave Maria, the Nicene Creed, and a prayer to Saint Anthony. Each prayer is written out in full, the words dense and compact, and as your eyes travel down the page you notice a detail that would escape anyone else. Certain words are underlined in a very faint shade of brown ink, a color so close to the black of the text that it is almost invisible. The underlines are thin, precise, not the casual stroke of a reader's finger, but a deliberate mark made by a steady hand. You recognize the shade of brown. It is the ink you use yourself when you add a particular pigment to your mixture, a subtle variation that serves as a signal. The underlined words are scattered through the prayers without any obvious pattern, and to anyone else they would seem like simple, pious emphasis. But you note them without any change of expression. Your face is calm as ever, and you set the paper to the side of your desk, returning your attention to the bill of lading. There is no need to decode the message now, not here in the open scriptorium where any eye might see. The paper will wait, folded in your pocket, until you are alone in your room with the candle lit and the door bolted. For now, you continue copying the wool shipment details, your quill moving at the same steady pace, the same careful formation of each letter. The only change in the room is the slow shift of the light from the high windows, which has moved from a pale grey to a warmer, more golden tone as the sun begins its descent towards the western lagoon. The tallow candles seem to burn more brightly as the outside light dims, their flames growing taller and more orange, and the shadows in the corners of the room deepen from grey to soft black. The young apprentice Niccolo has finished his bundle of quills and has begun a new task, copying a simple alphabet on a scrap of vellum, practicing his hand. His quill scratches with a slightly more hesitant rhythm than yours, occasionally pausing as he corrects an angle or inspects his work. Maestro Bertucci snores softly in his chair, a gentle bubbling sound that rises and falls with the regularity of the tide. The other copyists continue their work without conversation, each man absorbed in his own document, a legal contract, a love letter dictated by a nobleman, a catalogue of books for a monastery library. The only sounds are the scratching of quills, the occasional snip of a knife, the flutter of a page being turned, and the steady, almost musical drip of wax from a candle that has burned down to a stub. You complete the second copy of the bill of lading and set it aside to dry, the vellum curling slightly at the edges before you weigh it down with another lead block. Then you begin the third copy, the final one, and your hand moves with the same patience as the first, as if there were no difference between the beginning of a task and its end. The words flow from your quill, 12 bales of finest English wool, Cotswold shearings packed in canvas bound with hemp. The light from the high windows fades further until the candles are the only real illumination, their flames steady and golden against the gathering dusk. You feel the familiar ache beginning in your hand, a gentle tiredness in the muscles between your thumb and forefinger, and you pause to flex your fingers, stretching them out and then curling them back around the quill, a small ritual that keeps the cramps away. Finally, as the last line of the third copy is written, you hear the sound you have been waiting for. The bells of San Giacomo di Rialto begin to ring for vespers, their deep bronze notes rolling through the stone walls and vibrating in the air. The sound is slow and measured, each toll a long, sonorous wave that fades before the next begins, and it marks the end of the working day. Around you, the other copyists begin to stir, laying down their quills, stretching their backs, covering their ink pots with small wooden lids. Maestro Bertucci wakes with a start, blinking and wiping his chin, and he waves a hand in a vague gesture of dismissal. You dip your quill one last time to write the final date on the third copy, and then you set it down, cleaning the nib with a scrap of linen cloth until it is free of ink. You place the quill in its wooden case, close the ink pot, and gather your tools into your leather pouch. The paper with the underlined prayers you fold carefully and tuck into an inner pocket of your doublet where it sits flat against your chest. You rise from the stool, your legs slightly stiff from sitting, and you take a moment to look around the scriptorium as it prepares for night. Niccolo is sweeping the floor with a broom made of twigs, the bristles scratching against the flagstones. Maestro Bertucci is locking the supply cupboard with a heavy iron key that he wears in a chain around his neck. The other scribes are pulling on their cloaks and murmuring quiet good nights. The candles gutter and smoke as they are extinguished one by one, and the room fills with the smell of burnt wick and cooling wax. You walk to the door, your footsteps soft on the worn stone, and you push it open, stepping out into the cool evening air where the canal reflects the first pale stars of the evening. The bells have stopped ringing, but their echo seems to linger in the air, a memory of sound that fades slowly as you begin the short walk back to your hidden room, the coded prayer resting quietly against your heart. The walk back to the bookseller's shop is brief, a short passage through the narrow calle that you know so well now that your feet find the way without any need for thought. The evening has deepened into true twilight, the sky overhead a darkening blue, streaked with the last faint orange of the sun's descent, and the air is cool and still. You pass only a few people, a woman drawing water from a well, a man lighting the lamp above a street shrine, a boy hurrying home with a loaf of bread under his arm. None of them spare you more than a glance, a fleeting acknowledgement that fades as quickly as it appears, and you walk on with your head slightly bowed against the evening chill, one hand resting lightly on the pocket where the folded prayer paper lies. The sound of your footsteps is soft on the worn flagstones, a quiet rhythm that blends into the other evening sounds. The distant cry of a boatman, the cooing of pigeons settling into their roosts, the gentle lap of water in the canals. By the time you reach the side door of the shop, The last light has drained from the sky and the stars are beginning to appear one by one like tiny pinpricks in a dark cloth. You let yourself in and climb the spiral staircase, your hand trailing along the cool stone wall. The room at the top is dark and silent, the air slightly warmer than the street outside, and you close the door behind you and slide the small iron bolt into place with a soft click that is satisfying in its finality. The sound means that you are alone, that no one will enter without your knowledge, and for the next few hours the room is a world unto itself, a small pocket of stillness suspended above the sleeping city. You move through the darkness with the ease of long familiarity, your fingers finding the candle holder on the desk, the flint and steel beside it. You strike a spark, the brief, bright flash illuminating your hands and the pale surface of the desk for an instant, and then the charred cloth of the tinder catches, a tiny orange glow that you nurse with a gentle breath until the wick of the beeswax candle ignites. The flame rises and steadies, a tongue of golden light that pushes back the shadows and reveals the familiar shapes of the room, the bed with its wool blanket, the washstand, the cupboard, the desk with its ink pot and quills, and the small stack of paper. The light flickers once, twice, and then settles into a steady burn, and the room fills with the sweet, clean scent of melting beeswax. You set the candle in the center of the desk, where its light falls evenly across the workspace, and you take the folded paper from your pocket and place it on the desk beside the candle. The paper is slightly warm from your body heat. The crease is soft from being carried close to your chest. You do not open it yet. First, there are small rituals to attend to, habits of order that prepare the mind for the quiet work of decoding. You take the clay ash pot from its place at the back of the desk and set it within easy reach, its rim stained dark from 100 other messages that have been reduced to powder. You check that the ink pot has enough ink for writing, tilting it slightly towards the candlelight to see the dark liquid within. The quills are arranged as you left them, 3 of them standing in a small pottery cup, their nibs sharp and clean. You select one and test its point against the pad of your thumb, feeling the tiny prick of the sharpened tip, and then you set it down again. Everything is in order. Now you rise and go to the cupboard, where behind the simple provisions you keep the cipher book, a small volume bound in dark brown leather with the title stamped in gold on the spine, Petrarch's Sonnets. The book is no different in appearance from a dozen other volumes of poetry that a clerk might own, and the bookseller downstairs has a copy almost identical to it on his shelves. You bring the book to the desk and sit down, the stool creaking softly under your weight, and you take a moment to settle yourself, adjusting the position of the candle so that the light falls directly on the paper without casting shadows from your hands. The room around you is utterly still, the only sound the gentle hiss of the candle flame as it consumes the wax, and through the high window you can see the single star that always appears first in the evening sky, a bright, unwavering point of light hanging above the dark silhouette of the rooftops. You unfold the paper and smooth it flat on the desk, the prayer list written in that neat, unremarkable hand. The words are Latin, their rhythms familiar from countless masses. Pater noster qui es in calis, Ave Maria gratia, plenia, credo in unum Deum. But your eyes do not linger on the meaning of the prayers. They move instead to the faint brown underlines that mark certain words, thin strokes that barely disturb the surface of the paper. You count them slowly, your fingertip moving from one underlined word to the next, and you find that there are 8 marks in total, scattered through the text without any obvious connection. The first is under the word panem in the Pater Noster, the second under mulieribus in the Ave Maria, the third under crucifixus in the Creed, and so on, each word ordinary and unremarkable in its context. You take up your quill and a scrap of paper, and you write down the 8 underlined words in the order they appear, your script small and precise, the ink flowing smoothly from the nib. The list reads, Panem, mulieribus, crucifixis, pontio, ascendit, mortuorum, onam, sanctum. With the words transcribed, you set aside the prayer paper and open the small leather book of Petrarch's Sonnets. The book is old but well preserved, its pages slightly yellowed at the edges and soft from many turnings. The text is printed in a clear Roman type, each sonnet numbered and arranged 14 lines to a page, the Italian words dense and musical. This book is the key to your cipher, a system so simple that it has never been discovered because no one knows which book to use. The code works by numbers. Each underlined word in the prayer list corresponds to a specific instruction. The first letter of the underlined word tells you the page number based on a simple substitution that you keep only in your memory. P equals page 17, M equals page 31, C equals page 31, C equals page 3, and so on. The second letter tells you the line number on that page, and the third letter gives the position of the word within the line. It is a slow, methodical process that requires patience and attention, but it is also a process without any urgency, a kind of quiet puzzle that fills the evening hours with small, precise actions. You begin with the first word, panem. P is the 16th letter of the alphabet, and in your cipher, the number 16 plus 1 gives page 17. A is the first letter, so the line is 1. N is the 14th letter, so the word you want is the 14th word in the first line. You turn the pages of the Petrarch volume slowly, the paper whispering against itself, until you reach page 17. The sonnet on this page begins with the line, Voi scotate, in rhyme sparsil suono. You run your fingertip under the words, counting them one by one. Voi he escoltate, in rime spars il suono di que sospir ond io nudriva. The 14th word is io, a simple pronoun that means nothing by itself. You write it down on your scrap of paper beneath the list of underlined words, the quill scratching softly. The second underlined word is mulieribus. M is the 13th letter, plus 1 gives page 14. U is the 21st letter, but you have a rule for letters beyond the length of a sonnet line. You subtract 14 and use the remainder, so 21 less 14 gives line 7. The third letter, L, is the 12th letter, so you need the 12th word in line 7. You turn to page 14 and find line 7, which reads, Che quanto piesci al mondo et breve sonno. The words are che quanto piesci al mondo et breve sonno et io pier vivo. The 12th word is vivo. You write it down next to io on your scrap paper. The third word, crucifixus, begins with C, page 3. R is the 19th letter, less 14 gives line 4. Yar is the 22nd quite free said. You turn to page 3, line 4 and count per far una legiadra sua vendetta et seth. The 7th word is et, a simple conjunction, and you add it to the growing list. You continue in this way, moving through each of the 8 words with the same slow, deliberate pace. The candle burns steadily beside you, its flame lengthening slightly as the wax pool deepens, and occasionally you pause to trim the wick with the small knife, a single, clean cut that restores the flame to its proper height. The room is utterly quiet except for the soft sounds of your work, the rustle of pages turning, the scratch of the quill, the tiny click of the knife against the brass holder. Through the high window, the sky has darkened to a deep indigo, and more stars have appeared, scattered across the narrow rectangle of visible night like salt spilled on dark velvet. The city outside is settling into its night rhythm, the last boats moving on the canals, the last shutters closing, the last church bells tolling the hour, and then falling silent. Word by word, the message assembles itself on your scrap of paper. The 4th word, pontio, yields the word navi from page 15, line 11, word 9. The 5th, ascended, gives mercantile from page 1, line 5, word 4. The 6th, mortuorum, gives our from page 12, line 13, word 1. The 7th, on am, gives molo from page 19, line 1, word 15. The 8th, sanctam, gives attendano from page 16, line 3, word 12. When you have written them all out, the full message reads, Io vivo et navi mercantile al molo attendano. You read the sentence once, a soft whisper in your mind. I live, and merchant ships at the molo are waiting. It is a routine report. Nothing more, a confirmation that you are alive and that the ships have docked as expected. There is no urgency, no hidden alarm, no call to action. It is simply a thread in the larger web of quiet information that passes through the city like water through a canal system, unseen and unheard. You sit for a moment, the quill resting between your fingers, and let the words settle into your understanding. The report is the kind you've received many times before. A small update that will be passed along to someone who needs to know that the ships from the Levant have arrived. Tomorrow, you will encode a similar report of your own, a simple confirmation that all is well and that the chain remains unbroken. But for now, the decoding is complete, and the paper that held the prayer list must be destroyed. You pick it up, holding it by one corner, and you bring it to the candle flame. The fire catches the edge of the paper with a soft whump, a brief bloom of orange that shrinks to a steady, blue-edged flame. The paper curls as it burns, the words darkening and then vanishing as the fire consumes them, and you hold it until the flame licks close to your fingers before dropping the last fragment into the clay ash pot. The scrap with the decoded words follows, burned to ash and stirred into the pot with the tip of your quill knife until nothing remains but a fine grey powder that holds no secrets. You turn now to the task of preparing a new message, a reply that will confirm receipt and continue the chain. For this you take a fresh piece of paper, a half sheet torn from a larger page, and you open the Petrarch book again. Encoding is the reverse of decoding, a process of selecting the words you wish to send and then finding the corresponding page, line, and word numbers in the sonnets. Your message today is simple: Merci arrivate, tutto bene, cargo spesi e seta. The goods have arrived, all is well. The cargo is spices and silk. You write these words at the top of the fresh paper, then begin the slow work of transforming them into a cipher. You open the Petrarch book to a random page and scan the lines, looking for the word merci. You find it on page 22, line 3, word 6. The letters of mercy give you the cipher. M for the page, 13th letter, -1 to your code gives page 12, but you adjust using your own key table kept in memory, and so on. You work through each word, the quill moving slowly, the book pages turning and turning again. The candle burns down another inch, the pool of wax growing wider, and a thin trail of smoke rises from the wick whenever a draught from the window makes the flame flicker. The process takes time, for you must be exact, and there is a deep, quiet pleasure in the exactness of it, in the way the numbers align and the words emerge from the poetry like hidden fish rising to a still surface. When you have the full cipher, you write out a new prayer list, a set of Latin phrases that will appear to any outsider as a simple request for a copy of the Te Deum and a litany of saints. The underlined words are carefully marked in the same faint brown ink, thin strokes that will go unnoticed by anyone except the person who knows to look for them. You blot the ink with sand, shake the excess into the ash pot, and fold the paper into a tight square, sealing it with a drop of red wax pressed flat with your thumb. The work is done. You set the sealed message aside, clean the nib of your quill with the linen cloth, and close the ink pot with its wooden stopper. The Petrarch book goes back into the cupboard, tucked behind the wheel of cheese and the clay jug of watered wine, and you stretch your arms above your head, feeling the slight ache in your shoulders from sitting bent over the desk. The candle is now a stub, its flame burning low and blue around the wick, and you watch it for a long moment, observing the slow dance of the light, the way it casts your shadow huge and wavering on the plaster wall behind you. The room is warm with the accumulated heat of the candle and your own body, and the air smells of beeswax and burned paper and the faint, clean scent of ink. Outside, the city is deeply asleep, the canals silent, the stars wheeling slowly above the rooftops. You blow out the candle with a single soft breath, and the room falls into darkness. The only light, the thin starlight filtering through the high window like a distant memory of day. You sit in the dark for a while, letting your eyes adjust, feeling the stillness settle around you like a blanket, and then you rise and move towards the bed. Your hand, finding the familiar shape of the iron bedstead. Your body ready for the slow drift into sleep. Night has fallen fully over Venice, and the city has folded itself into a labyrinth of shadow and water. You stand in your room, with the last candle extinguished, the darkness around you complete, except for the faint starlight that falls through the high window like a dusting of pale silver on the floorboards. The air in the room is still warm from the candles long burning, but you know that outside the evening chill has settled into the stones, and you take your dark wool cloak from its peg by the door. The cloak is heavy and soft, its fibers smelling faintly of lanolin and wood smoke from the brazier downstairs, and you swing it around your shoulders, feeling the weight settle across your back and arms. You fasten the clasp at your throat, a simple iron hook and eye that you can work by touch alone, and then you pull the hood up over your head, the wool falling forward to shadow your face. Beside the door, on a small shelf, sits the lantern you will carry tonight. It is a small square lantern made of tin, with panes of thin horn instead of glass, the horn translucent and golden brown like hardened honey. A single tallow candle sits inside, fresh and unlit, and you check that the wick is properly trimmed before you strike a spark from your flint and steel and touch it to the wick. The candle catches with a small bright flame that steadies quickly, and you close the little door of the lantern, the horn panels glowing with a warm, muted light. The lantern has a shutter on one side, a thin piece of tin on a hinge that you can close to hide the light entirely or open to direct the beam. For now you leave the shutter open just a crack, a narrow vertical slit that lets out a thin blade of light, enough to show you the ground ahead without drawing attention from any window that might still be awake. You lift the lantern by its wire handle, the metal cool against your fingers, and you open the door of your room, stepping out onto the spiral staircase. The descent is slow and careful, your soft shoes quiet on the worn stone, the lantern swinging gently with each step so that the light sways across the walls in a slow, rhythmic dance. At the bottom you unbolt the alley door and step out into the night, pulling the door closed behind you until you hear the latch click. The alley is utterly dark, a black slash between buildings that the starlight does not reach, and you stand for a moment letting your senses adjust, the lantern beam picking out the rough texture of the opposite wall and the damp cobbles underfoot. The air is cool and damp against your cheeks, carrying the familiar night smells of Venice, salt water and mud from the canals exposed at low tide, the faint smoke of 1,000 cooking fires that have now burned down to ash, the musty perfume of old stone that has been wet for centuries and never truly dries. You begin to walk, your pace slow and measured, the lantern held at waist height so that its beam illuminates a small circle of ground just ahead of your feet. The flagstones appear in the light, one after another, their edges softened by moss, their surfaces pitted with age, and your footsteps make a soft, regular sound that echoes slightly in the narrow space. The alley twists between tall, leaning buildings whose upper stories nearly touch overhead, leaving only a thin ribbon of sky visible, a dark indigo band scattered with faint stars. You walk without any particular destination in mind, for the act of walking itself is the purpose tonight. A quiet circuit through the sleeping city that will eventually carry you towards a certain door near the arsenal. But there is no hurry, and you let your feet choose the path, turning left or right as the alleys open before you. The lantern beam picks out fragments of the world as you pass, small details that appear briefly and then fade back into darkness. A stone wellhead stands in a tiny square, its rim carved with worn lions whose faces have been smoothed by centuries of hands and rain. The light glints off the metal chain that hangs down into the unseen water, and a single drop falls from the chain with a soft musical plink that echoes in the silence. A few steps further, a small shrine to the Virgin is set into a niche in the wall, its plaster frame painted blue and gold, and at its base a single fresh flower has been placed in a tiny clay pot, a white rosebud whose petals are just beginning to open, its scent a faint sweetness that drifts through the cool air. You pause there for a moment, the lantern light falling gently on the painted face of the Madonna, and then you move on. The city is profoundly quiet at this hour, but it is not silent, and you stop frequently to listen, standing still in the middle of the alley with the lantern held steady. The sounds are small and distant, the secret night music of Venice. From a broken gutter somewhere above, Water drips into a puddle with a slow, irregular rhythm, each drop falling after a pause that is never quite the same length, a natural metronome that marks time in its own patient way. From far away, perhaps across several canals, you hear the faint sound of singing drifting from a tavern that has not yet closed, a low, melodious voice accompanied by a lute, the notes carrying through the cold air with a melancholy sweetness. The song is in the Venetian dialect, and though you cannot make out the words, the tune is slow and gentle, a lullaby for the last drinkers. The singing fades as you walk further, swallowed by the maze of stone, and then the only sounds are those you make yourself. The soft scuff of your shoes on stone, the gentle creak of the lantern handle as it shifts in your grip, and the steady, quiet rhythm of your own breathing. You pass a cat slinking silently along the edge of a wall, its body low and fluid, its eyes catching the lantern light for an instant with a flash of green before it vanishes into a shadow. Somewhere a wooden shutter creaks as the night breeze nudges it, and you hear the distant hollow sound of a boat bumping against a mooring pole, the water sloshing softly around its hull. The air grows cooler as you walk, the chill rising from the canals that thread through the city like veins of black glass. You pull the cloak tighter around your shoulders, the wool warm and comforting, and you continue on, your pace never changing. You come to a small bridge, one of the hundreds that arch over the canals, its wooden planks worn smooth by countless feet. You step onto it, the lantern light sweeping across the dark water below. The canal is still, its surface a mirror of black glass that reflects the few lit windows in the buildings above, the lights shimmering on the water like fallen stars trapped in the depths. The reflection wavers slightly as a ripple passes, the only sign of movement in the water, and then it stills again. You walk to the center of the bridge and stop, leaning your free hand on the wooden railing that is slightly slippery with night dew, and you look down at the canal. A small boat is moored below, its hull dark and its oars shipped, and it rocks, almost imperceptibly, the water lapping against its sides with a sound so faint it is more a feeling than a sound. A gentle, liquid whisper. You stay there for a long moment, the silence pressing in around you, the city spread out in all directions like a vast, quiet house where everyone is asleep. Then you continue across the bridge, your steps sounding hollow on the wood, and you descend into the alley on the other side, the lantern beam once again illuminating the narrow path ahead. The alley here is even narrower, the walls so close that your shoulders nearly brush them, and the ground underfoot changes from flagstone to brick, the bricks worn to a smooth, dark polish. The smell in this alley is different, a faint, pleasant aroma of baking that lingers from the ovens that were lit hours ago, the memory of bread and yeast still clinging to the walls. You pass a doorway where a cat has left a small fishbone, picked clean and white, and the lantern light glints off the tiny bones before they disappear into shadow. You turn a corner and find yourself in a small campo, a square no larger than a room, with a single tree growing in its center. The tree is a fig, its branches bare and twisted in the winter night, and around its base the ground is paved with broken terracotta tiles. A stone bench sits against one wall, and you walk over to it, sitting down for a moment to rest your legs. The bench is cold through your cloak, but it is not uncomfortable, and you set the lantern on the ground beside you, the beam now illuminating the trunk of the fig tree and the wall beyond. You sit in the quiet, listening to the city's night breath. A dog barks once far away and then is silent. A church bell tolls the hour, a single deep note that rolls across the rooftops and fades slowly into the darkness. You count the tolls, 10, 11, 12, and then silence again. You rise from the bench, your body moving without urgency, and take up the lantern once more. The walk continues, a slow, meandering path through the labyrinth. You cross another bridge, this one made of stone with low, wide steps, and the canal beneath it is wider, a rio that leads towards the basin of San Marco. The water here smells more strongly of the sea, a clean, salty scent that fills your lungs, and you can hear the distant sound of waves slapping against the stone foundations of the molo, a steady, rhythmic pulse like the breathing of some great sleeping animal. You pause on this bridge longer than the last, watching the water move beneath you, the lantern light glinting off the tiny wavelets that form and dissolve. A gondola passes far down the canal, its lantern a small point of light that glides silently across the water. The gondolier, a dark silhouette standing at the stern, his oar moving with a slow, fluid motion. You watch until the light disappears around a bend, and then you walk on. The streets grow even narrower and more twisted as you approach the district of Castello, where the old shipyards and warehouses cluster near the arsenal. The buildings here are taller and darker, their facades plain and functional, built for labor rather than beauty. The alleys are so narrow that the lantern light barely reaches the walls on either side, and you move through a world reduced to the small circle of illuminated stone at your feet. The sounds change too. You hear the creak of a heavy gate somewhere, the distant clang of metal on metal as the night watchman makes his rounds, the soft rustle of rats in a pile of refuse that you pass without looking. The air is damp here, carrying the smell of old timber and tar, and the particular mustiness of warehouses that have stored salt and spices for centuries. You come to a door set into a high, blank wall. This is the door near the arsenal, the one you have been walking towards without hurry. It is old and solid, its iron studs rusted, and beside it a single stone step worn into a hollow. You do not knock. There is no need. Instead, you stand before the door and listen. Beyond it lies a small, forgotten courtyard, a place of wild mint and an old olive tree. But you do not enter tonight. Your walk has been for its own sake, a quiet movement through the sleeping city, and the door is simply a point of turning, a marker in the geography of your hidden path. You lift the lantern and let its beam play across the iron studs, the rough grain of the wood, the small weeds that push through the cracks in the step. Then you lower the lantern, turn, and begin the walk back towards your room. The return journey follows a different route, as if the city itself guides your feet along a new set of alleys and bridges. You pass a fountain where water trickles from a lion's mouth into a stone basin, the sound a soft, continuous murmur. You pass a walled garden where the bare branches of a wisteria vine twist over the gate, the moonlight just beginning to touch them as the clouds part briefly overhead. The moon is a thin crescent, a sliver of white that hangs low in the sky, and its light is faint but enough to cast a pale glow on the rooftops, outlining the chimneys and the terracotta tiles in silver. You close the shutter on the lantern, letting the moonlight guide you for a while, and you walk in a world of soft greys and deep shadows, your footsteps the only sound. Eventually you reach the familiar alley that leads to the bookseller's shop, the smell of old paper and leather greeting you as you approach the side door. You unbolt it quietly and step inside, climbing the spiral staircase with slow, tired steps, the lantern once again open to light your way. The room at the top is dark and cool, the window showing the same thin crescent moon now higher in the sky. You set the lantern on the desk, extinguish its candle with a soft breath, and stand in the sudden darkness, letting the stillness of the room envelop you. Your cloak comes off and is hung on its peg. Your shoes are slipped off and placed beside the bed. You lie down on the straw mattress, the wool blanket pulled up to your chin, and you listen to the last sounds of the night, the distant toll of a bell, the gentle lap of water in the canal, the creak of the old building settling around you. Your eyes close, and the city holds you in its quiet embrace until sleep comes, as soft and dark as the water in the canals. The night after your long walk through the Collie, you sleep deeply and wake without any memory of dreams, the grey light through the high window pulling you gently back to consciousness. The morning passes in the scriptorium with the usual quiet work, the copying of a contract for a spice merchant, the trimming of quills, the slow burning of tallow candles. But as the afternoon fades and the bells ring for vespers, you know that tonight the quiet circuit will continue, that the door near the arsenal you turned away from last night will now be opened. You return to your room, eat a simple supper of bread and cheese and a small handful of dried figs, and wait for the deep darkness to settle over the city. The waiting is not filled with anticipation, it is simply time passing, the candle on your desk burning down another inch while you sit with the Petrarch book open, reading a sonnet without really reading, letting the words flow through your mind like water through a canal. When the last light has drained from the sky and the stars are bright in the narrow rectangle of the window, you rise, take your dark cloak from its peg, and prepare the small tin lantern with a fresh candle. The routine is by now as familiar as breathing. The strike of the flint, the glow of the tinder, the steady flame behind the horn panels. You close the shutter to a thin slit, pull the hood over your head, and descend the spiral staircase into the cold night air. The walk tonight has a different quality, a sense of quiet purpose that does not hurry your steps, but lends them a gentle direction. You trace the same twisting route through the narrow alleys, past the stone well head with its worn lions, past the shrine with its fresh white rosebud, now beginning to wilt at the edges, across the small wooden bridge where the dark water mirrors the stars. The city is as silent as before. The only sounds the drip of water from broken gutters, the distant cry of a night bird, and the soft, steady rhythm of your own footsteps. The lantern beam sways with your stride, illuminating the mossy cobbles and the damp brick walls, and you move through the labyrinth with the ease of long practice, your body knowing the turns and the bridges, even when your conscious mind is adrift in the stillness of the night. You cross the stone bridge near the basin of San Marco, and the air changes, growing cooler and sharper with the clean scent of the sea. You hear the water lapping against the foundations of the arsenal, a sound both distant and close, like the breathing of the great shipyard in its sleep. You come at last to the door set into the high blank wall, the door with the rusted iron studs that you visited the night before and left unopened. Now you stop before it, the lantern light falling on the dark wood and the worn stone step. The door is old, its planks thick and rough, the iron studs arranged in a pattern of squares, each stud a raised dome of dark, pitted metal. There is no handle, only a heavy iron ring that hangs from a plate, and you take the ring in your free hand, feeling the cold metal bite against your palm. The ring turns with a slight resistance, and you push the door inward. It opens not with a dramatic creak, for the hinges have been oiled recently by someone who also knows this place, but with a low, soft groan that fades quickly into the night. You step through the doorway and into the forgotten courtyard. The courtyard is small, no larger than a modest room, and it is open to the sky, the walls rising on 3 sides to the height of 2 stories. The 4th side is the wall you just passed through, and above it the rooftops of the arsenal buildings are visible as dark silhouettes against the starry sky. The ground is paved with old flagstones, but nature has been at work here for a long time, and tufts of wild mint and coarse grass push up through the cracks, their leaves brushing against your ankles as you walk. The smell of the mint rises with each step, a sharp, clean fragrance that mingles with the salt air and the damp mineral scent of the old stones. In the center of the courtyard grows a single olive tree, its trunk gnarled and twisted, its bark rough and silvery grey, its branches spreading out to form a sparse canopy. The leaves are small and narrow, dark green on one side and silver on the other, and they rustle softly in the faint breeze that moves through the courtyard, a sound like the whispering of a calm sea. The tree has been here for many years, its roots pushing deep into the ground beneath the flagstones, and it gives the courtyard a feeling of quiet permanence, as if this small forgotten space has been waiting here unchanged for centuries. Against the left wall sits a stone bench, its surface worn smooth by the weather and the weight of those who have sat here before you. You walk over to it, the grass and mint brushing against the hem of your cloak, and you set the lantern on the bench beside you. You open the shutter a little wider so that the light spills out across the courtyard, illuminating the trunk of the olive tree and the far wall, with its patches of pale lichen spreading like a map of some unknown country. The lichen is a soft grey-green, almost luminous in the lantern light, and it grows in circles and whorls that suggest the slow, patient work of decades. You look at the patterns for a while, letting your eyes trace the shapes without any need to name them, your mind as still as the surface of a canal at slack tide. Then you sit down on the bench, the stone cold even through your cloak, and you settle yourself for a time of waiting. The waiting is not tense. It is simply a quiet pause in the flow of the night, a restful interval where nothing is required of you except to be still. You listen to the small sounds of the courtyard, The rustle of the olive leaves, the faint chirp of a cricket hidden somewhere in the grass, the soft, distant boom of a ship's bell from the basin of San Marco. The lantern flame burns steadily, its light casting a warm glow on the immediate surroundings and leaving the corners of the courtyard in deep shadow. You can see the details of the wall opposite. The bricks are old and uneven, their mortar crumbling in places, and a small iron hook is set into the stone, perhaps once used to hang a lantern or a bird cage. A snail has left a silvery trail across one of the bricks, a delicate glistening line that catches the light. You watch the trail, following its meandering path with your eyes until it disappears into a shadow. Time slows to a gentle crawl, each minute stretching out like a long, comfortable exhale. Your breathing is slow and regular, and you feel the tension of the day draining out of your shoulders and into the cool stone of the bench. The air is cold enough that you can see your breath when you exhale, a faint mist that forms and then vanishes, and you pull the cloak a little tighter, the wool soft against your chin. The hood has fallen back slightly, and the night air touches your cheeks and the tips of your ears with a cool, clean kiss. You do not think about the message, or the chain, or the ships at the molo. You simply exist in the courtyard, a quiet figure on a stone bench, as much a part of the night as the olive tree or the lichen or the cricket in the grass. The moon is not yet risen, but the stars are bright overhead, and you can pick out familiar constellations through the opening of the courtyard, the tilted W of Cassiopeia, the bright point of the North Star, the faint haze of the Milky Way, stretching across the dark like a river of light. After a time, you become aware of a sound that is not part of the courtyard's natural music. It is the sound of footsteps, soft and slow, approaching from the alley beyond the wall. The footsteps are careful, measured, the steps of someone who knows this place and knows to move quietly. They stop just on the other side of the wall, near a gap where the old bricks have crumbled away to leave a narrow opening, a space no larger than a hand's breadth. You do not turn your head or alter your posture. You simply wait, your eyes still on the lichen patterns, your breathing unchanged. A moment passes, and then a hand appears through the gap, a hand wrapped in a dark cloth so that only the fingers are visible, pale against the black fabric. The hand is small and slender, the fingers steady, and it holds a small object, a wax-sealed tube about the length of your palm, its surface smooth and dark. The hand extends through the gap and pauses, waiting. You rise from the bench, your movements slow and unhurried, and you walk the few steps to the wall, the grass and mint brushing against your legs. You reach out and take the tube from the hand, your fingers closing around it with a gentle grip. The tube is cool to the touch, the wax seal slightly rough under your thumb, and you feel the weight of the paper inside, a small dense cylinder that fits easily in your palm. The hand withdraws without a word, slipping back through the gap and disappearing into the darkness beyond. You hear the footsteps resume, soft and slow, retreating down the alley until they fade into the general silence of the night. You stand by the wall for a moment, the tube in your hand, and then you turn and walk back to the bench, sitting down again with the same quiet deliberation. You examine the tube in the lantern light. It is a roll of paper, sealed at both ends with dark blue wax, the impressions showing no signet mark, only a plain, smooth surface that reveals nothing of the sender. The paper is of good quality, slightly creamy in color, and it has been rolled tightly so that it forms a neat cylinder. You turn it over in your fingers, feeling its weight and texture, and then you slip it into the inner pocket of your cloak, where it sits securely against your ribs, a small, quiet presence that you will carry home. The drop is complete, a silent exchange in a forgotten courtyard, and you have done nothing more than sit and wait and accept a small object from a stranger's hand. There is no drama, no danger, only the calm flow of the routine you have followed many times before. You remain on the bench for a while longer, not out of any need, but simply because the courtyard invites stillness. The olive tree rustles softly in the breeze, and you watch a single leaf detach from a branch and spiral down, landing on the flagstone at your feet. The leaf is silver-grey on one side and dark green on the other, and it lies there motionless, a tiny, perfect shape. You look up at the sky, where the moon has now begun to rise above the rooftops, a thin crescent that casts a pale milky light into the courtyard. The stars seem dimmer now, outshone by the moon's gentle glow, and the shadows shift slightly, the trunk of the olive tree casting a long, twisted shadow across the flagstones. The temperature drops a little more, and you feel the cold seeping through the soles of your shoes, a reminder that it is time to go. You rise, pick up the lantern, and walk to the center of the courtyard, where you pause for a moment beneath the olive tree. You place your hand on the rough bark, feeling its cool, ancient texture, the ridges and valleys that have been shaped by sun and wind and rain. The tree is a living thing, silent and patient, and you feel a quiet kinship with it, two still points in the moving darkness of the city. You leave the courtyard by the same door, pulling it closed behind you until you hear the latch engage. The alley outside is as dark as before, and you open the lantern shutter a little wider to light your way. The walk back to your room follows a familiar path, but tonight you take it even more slowly, savoring the quiet of the empty streets, the way the lantern light plays on the old stones, the soft, rhythmic sound of your footsteps. You cross the bridges, pass the well-head and the shrine, and finally reach the side door of the bookseller's shop, where you let yourself in and climb the spiral staircase with tired, steady legs. In your room, you set the lantern on the desk, extinguish the candle, and stand for a moment in the darkness, the sealed tube still in your pocket, a small, cool weight against your side. Tomorrow you will open it and decode its message, but for now it can wait. You hang your cloak on its peg, remove your shoes, and lie down on the straw mattress, pulling the wool blanket up to your chin. The night has been quiet and uneventful, a slow passage through the sleeping city, and as you close your eyes you feel the deep calm of the courtyard still within you, a stillness that carries you gently into sleep. The sealed tube from the courtyard rests in the inner pocket of your cloak through the night, and when you wake the next morning, it is the first thing your fingers find as you dress in the grey dawn light. You place it on the desk beside the cold candle and go about your morning routine. The splash of cool water, the bread and cheese, the watered wine sipped slowly while standing at the high window, watching the sky turn from pearl to pale gold. The tube waits patiently, a small cylinder of dark paper and blue wax, and you do not open it yet, for the decoding requires the Petrarch book and a fresh candle and the quiet solitude of evening. The day ahead will take you elsewhere, to a place where messages are not received but made, and so you slip the tube into the pocket of your doublet, where it will ride against your ribs through the hours to come. The morning passes in the scriptorium with the usual quiet work. You copy a letter of credit for a merchant trading in Alexandrian cotton, the quill moving steadily across the vellum, the tallow candles burning with their smoky yellow flames. Niccolo the apprentice is practicing his capitals today, his tongue poking from the corner of his mouth, and Maestro Bertucci dozes in his chair with a handkerchief draped over his face to keep the light from his eyes. The work is calm and absorbing, and when the bells ring for midday, you set down your quill and stretch your fingers, feeling the pleasant ache of a morning well spent. But this afternoon, you will not remain in the scriptorium. You have a different task, one that takes you away from the copying desks and into the quiet back canals of the Castello district. You leave the scriptorium and walk through the market, pausing to buy a small round of soft cheese and a handful of dried apricots from a stall near the Rialto, provisions for the afternoon. The market is busy at this hour, the stalls crowded with shoppers, the air filled with the calls of vendors and the smell of fresh herbs and fish, but you move through it with your usual quiet invisibility, a man in a plain doublet carrying a canvas bag. Near the edge of the market, where the fondamenta opens onto a smaller canal, you find what you were looking for, a small sandolo tied to a striped mooring pole, its hull painted a dark, faded green, its single oar shipped and resting across the thwarts. The boat belongs to no one in particular, one of several small craft that are left tied along this canal for anyone with a coin and a need, and you have used it before. You untie the rope from the pole, the hemp rough and slightly damp in your hands, and step carefully into the boat, feeling it rock gently under your weight before settling. You place your bag on the wooden seat, take up the long pole that serves as both propulsion and rudder in the narrow canals, and push off from the stone embankment. Poling a sandolo is a slow, rhythmic art, and you settle into its familiar cadence as the boat glides away from the fondamenta. You stand near the stern, the pole in both hands, its end dropping into the green water and finding the muddy bottom with a soft, dull thud. You push, the pole bending slightly against the resistance, and the boat slides forward with a gentle surge, the water parting around the hull with a liquid whisper. Then you lift the pole, letting the water stream off its length in silver rivulets, and drop it again. Push again, the motion repeating in a steady cycle that soon becomes automatic. The canal is narrow here, the buildings rising directly from the water on both sides, their plaster walls stained with damp, and their lower windows barred with iron grills. The water is dark and still, smelling of mud and salt, and the only sound is the soft splash of the pole entering the water, the creak of the boat's timbers, and the occasional cry of a gull wheeling overhead. You guide the sandolo through a series of turns, the pole acting as a rudder when you trail it behind, and the city changes around you as you move deeper into the Castello district. The grand palazzi of the Rialto give way to older, plainer buildings, their facades unadorned and their colours faded to shades of ochre and grey. This is the part of Venice where the working life of the city unfolds, warehouses for salt and grain, workshops for sailmakers and rope twisters, small foundries where the ring of hammers on metal echoes across the water. The canal widens slightly, and you pass a barge loaded with barrels, its crewmen sitting on the hatch covers eating bread and olives, their voices a low murmur that carries across the water. They do not look at you as you pass, and you do not look at them. On the canals, privacy is respected by the simple act of not seeing what is not your business. After a time you reach a narrower side canal, a rio so small that the buildings on either side nearly touch, casting the water into perpetual shadow. The air here is cooler and smells of old timber and damp hemp, and the faint, not unpleasant mustiness of decay. You pole the sandolo to a small water gate, an arched opening in a high brick wall that is studded with iron rings for mooring. The gate is old, its wooden doors sagging on their hinges, and it opens into the ground floor of an abandoned salt warehouse that has stood empty for years. You tie the boat to one of the rings, the rope secure around the rusted iron, and step out onto a narrow stone ledge that runs along the inside wall. The warehouse interior is vast and dim, its ceiling lost in shadow, its floor of beaten earth littered with the debris of its former life, broken barrels, scraps of old sacking, a drift of dry salt that crunches under your shoes. The air is still and cold, and the only light comes from high, grimy windows set near the roof, their panes so coated with dirt that the sunlight filters through as a pale, diffuse glow. You walk across the warehouse floor, your footsteps echoing softly in the cavernous space, and you come to a wall that appears to be solid brick. But you know the secret of this place, and you press your hand against a particular brick at shoulder height, feeling the faint give before the entire section of wall swings inward on silent, oiled hinges. The false wall opens into a smaller room, and you step through, pulling the wall close behind you. This hidden room is where you keep the small printing press. The room is compact, perhaps 10 feet square, with a low ceiling of heavy timber beams. Against one wall stands the press itself, a sturdy wooden frame with a large iron screw mechanism, its surfaces dark with age and ink. Beside it is a small work table holding the tools of the printer's trade, a leather dauber for inking, a stack of dampened paper, a pot of thick black ink, and a small case of wooden type. A single thick candle in a brass holder sits on the table, and you light it now, the flame catching and rising, casting a warm, steady light over the room. There are no windows here, and the candle is the only illumination, its glow reflecting off the polished iron of the press and the dark wood of the type case. The air smells of ink and oil, and the faint, clean scent of the pine resin that has been used to seal the wooden frame against damp. You set your canvas bag on the floor and take the sealed tube from your pocket, placing it on the work table beside the candle. But before you can use the press, you must decode the message inside, and so you sit on the simple wooden stool that waits beside the table and break the blue wax seal with your thumbnail, the wax cracking and falling away in small hard fragments. You unroll the tube and smooth the paper flat. The message is written in the same merchant's mark cipher, a series of symbols that appear to be a list of spice prices. Pepper at so many ducats per pound, cinnamon at another rate, cloves and nutmeg and saffron arranged in neat columns. You read the cipher easily now, the symbols translating in your mind without conscious effort, and the message tells you the names of 3 ships that have docked at the Molo and the numbers of their berths. It also contains a brief instruction. A new contact will arrive within the week, a man who will identify himself by carrying a small book bound in green leather. The information is simple and useful, and you commit it to memory with a few moments of focused attention before you hold the paper to the candle flame and watch it burn, the ash falling into a small clay pot you keep on the work table for this purpose. Now you turn to the press. Your task today is to print a single sheet that will carry an encoded response, a confirmation that looks to all eyes like an official merchant decree. The process of printing is slow and methodical, a series of small, precise actions that require your full attention, and you find the same calm in it that you find in the copying of documents at the scriptorium. You begin by selecting the type from the wooden case, which is divided into small compartments, each holding a different letter or symbol. The type pieces are small metal blocks, their faces bright and sharp, their bodies cool and heavy in your fingers. You pick out the letters one by one, setting them into a composing stick, a small metal tray that you hold in your left hand. The words form slowly beneath your fingers, each letter placed upside down and backwards so that it will print correctly, and you spell out a text that appears to be a notice about the taxation of imported pepper. The real message is hidden in the numbers. The tax rates correspond to the berth numbers of the ships, and the quantities of pepper listed correspond to the number of passengers on each vessel. The hidden text will be readable only to someone who knows the cipher, and to everyone else it will be simply a dull administrative document. When the composing stick is full, you transfer the type carefully to the chase, a rectangular metal frame that holds the type in place for printing. You lock the type into the chase with small wooden wedges, tapping them gently with a mallet until the type is secure and perfectly level. Then you place the chase onto the bed of the press, sliding it into position beneath the platen, the heavy iron plate that will press the paper against the inked type. You take up the leather dauber, a wooden handle with a pad of felted wool, and you work it into the thick black ink, spreading the ink evenly across the pad. The ink is viscous and glossy, smelling of linseed oil and lampblack, and you daub it onto the type with a gentle rolling motion, the ink transferring to the raised metal letters in a thin, even layer. You check the coverage by tilting the candle closer, the light glinting off the wet ink, and you touch up a few spots where the ink is too thin before you are satisfied. Now you take a sheet of the dampened paper from the stack. The paper is slightly moist to the touch, a condition that helps it accept the ink more evenly, and you lay it carefully on the tympan, a hinged frame covered with parchment that holds the paper in place. You fold the tympan down over the type, then slide the entire assembly under the platen. The moment has come to pull the lever, the heavy iron bar that extends from the side of the press. You grasp it with both hands, feeling the cool metal against your palms, and you pull it towards you in a smooth, steady motion. The mechanism engages with a soft groan, the great iron screw turning and pressing the platen down onto the paper with a force that you feel through the soles of your feet. There is a moment of resistance, a pause in which the press seems to hold its breath, and then you feel the slight give as the paper accepts the ink. You hold the pressure for a count of 3, then release the lever, the platen rising, and you slide the assembly out and fold back the tympan. The printed sheet is perfect. The letters are crisp and black, the lines straight, the margins even, the whole document looking exactly like the kind of notice that might be posted on the door of the dogana. You lift it carefully, holding it by the edges to avoid smudging the wet ink, and you hang it on a small line strung across the corner of the room, where it will dry in the warmth of the candle. Then you turn to the task of cleaning the press, for the ink must not be allowed to dry on the type. You take up a soft rag and a small bottle of turpentine, the liquid clear and sharp-smelling, and you begin to wipe the ink from the type, each letter cleaned individually with a careful circular motion. The turpentine dissolves the ink, and the rag comes away stained black, and you work through the entire chase until every piece of type is clean and gleaming. Then you unlock the chase, remove the type, and return each letter to its proper compartment, in the case, your fingers moving with the memory of long practice, placing the small metal blocks into their slots with a series of soft, metallic clicks. The press is clean, the type is stored, the printed sheet is drying on the line. You sit on the stool for a moment, letting the stillness of the hidden room settle around you. The candle has burned down by half, its wax pooling in the brass holder, and the air is warm and still. You feel the quiet satisfaction of a task completed without hurry or error, the same feeling you have at the end of a day in the scriptorium. When the printed sheet is dry to the touch, you take it down and examine it once more in the candlelight. Then you take a small bowl of weak tea, prepared in advance and left on the work table, and you daub the tea onto the paper with a soft brush, just enough to give the sheet a slightly aged, yellowed look. You hold it near the candle's warmth until it dries again, and the finished document looks as if it has been carried in a merchant's ledger for a week. You fold the printed sheet, tuck it into the pocket of your doublet, and gather your bag from the floor. The candle is extinguished with a soft breath, and you step out of the hidden room, pulling the false wall closed behind you until you hear the click of the latch. The warehouse is as dim and silent as before, and you cross the earthen floor to the water gate, where the sandalo still waits, its hull bumping gently against the stone ledge. You untie the rope, step into the boat, and pole yourself back out into the side canal, the afternoon light now beginning to slant towards evening, the water turning a deeper shade of green. The return journey is as slow and rhythmic as the outward leg, the pole pushing and lifting, the boat gliding, the city sliding past in its quiet, timeless way. By the time you reach the fundamenta near the Rialto and tie up the boat, the sun is low over the rooftops, and the bells are ringing for vespers, and you walk back to your room with the printed sheet in your pocket, and the calm of the hidden room still wrapped around you like a cloak. The printed sheet is dry and folded, tucked inside a small commonplace book that you carry under your arm as you step out into the late morning light. The book is a modest object, bound in plain brown leather, with the edges of its pages tinted red, the kind of volume a clerk or a student might fill with quotations and observations. Inside its cover, slipped between two blank pages, lies the document you printed in the hidden room, the fake merchant decree with its secret message hidden in the numbers. The book looks exactly as it should, unremarkable, innocent, a possession that draws no eye. You hold it loosely, your thumb resting on the spine, and you walk through the narrow alleys with the same quiet, unhurried pace that has carried you through 100 other mornings. The day is fine, one of those days in late spring when the light has a gentle, golden quality and the air is soft and warm without being hot. Above the rooftops, the sky is a pale, washed blue with a few high clouds drifting slowly, their shapes changing as they move. The sun falls into the alleys in slanted shafts, illuminating the worn cobbles and the green moss that grows in the cracks, and you pass through alternating pools of light and shadow, the warmth of the sun pleasant on your shoulders. The city is awake and busy, but the sounds are muted here in the back streets, the distant call of a vendor, the cooing of pigeons, the splash of a bucket lowered into a well. You walk without hurry, enjoying the simple act of moving through the familiar labyrinth, your soft shoes padding on the stone, the commonplace book, a comfortable weight under your arm. Your destination today is the public gardens near the hospital of the Mendicanti, a green space that lies on the northern edge of the city, not far from the lagoon. The gardens were laid out many years ago for the patients of the hospital, a place where they could walk and sit in the fresh air and look at the water. But over time, they have become a quiet retreat for anyone who seeks a moment of peace. The gardens are open to all, and on a morning like this, they will be filled with a slow, gentle population, old men on benches, nuns walking in pairs, mothers with small children, and the occasional scholar reading under a tree. It is the perfect place for a drop, a place where people come and go without notice, and where a book left on a bench is nothing out of the ordinary. You walk north through the district of Cannaregio, crossing bridges and passing churches, the buildings gradually becoming less grand as you move away from the Rialto. The canals here are wider and more open, and the air carries the clean scent of the lagoon, a breath of salt and open water that freshens the lungs. You pass a small boatyard where men are repairing a fishing boat, the sound of their hammers a steady, distant tapping that fades as you turn a corner. You pass a bakery where the smell of fresh bread pours out into the street, warm and yeasty, and a group of children are playing a game with stones on the pavement, their voices high and bright before they fall quiet, absorbed in their contest. The sun climbs higher and the shadows shorten, and you feel the day's warmth beginning to seep into the stones and rise up through the soles of your shoes. At last you come to the gates of the Mendicanti Gardens. The entrance is a simple archway in a high brick wall, its iron gate standing permanently open, the hinges rusted from the salt air. You walk through the archway and into a different world, a world of green and calm that seems far removed from the stone city outside. The gardens are not large, but they are laid out with care, a series of gravel paths that wind between beds of flowers and shrubs, with tall cypress trees rising at intervals like dark green sentinels. The paths are lined with low box hedges, their leaves small and glossy, and the gravel is pale and crunches softly underfoot as you walk. The air here is different too. It smells of earth and leaves and the sweet fragrance of the flowers that bloom in the borders, roses and lavender, and the small white blossoms of jasmine that climb up a wooden trellis. The sound of the city is muffled by the walls and the greenery, reduced to a distant hum, and the dominant sounds are the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the hum of bees moving among the flowers, and the soft, repetitive cooing of doves that strut along the paths, with their iridescent necks bobbing. You walk slowly along the main path, taking in the details of the garden with a quiet appreciation. To your left, a bed of lavender is in full bloom, the purple spikes rising above the silvery foliage, and the scent is so strong that you can taste it in the back of your throat, a clean, floral sweetness. A butterfly flits among the lavender. Its wings are pale yellow-edged with black, and you pause to watch it for a moment. Its flight a series of gentle, erratic loops that carry it from flower to flower. To your right, a small fountain plays in the center of a circular pool, the water rising from a stone lion's mouth and falling back into the basin with a soft, continuous trickle. The sound of the water is soothing, a liquid music that weaves through the other garden sounds, and the surface of the pool shimmers with reflected sunlight, casting tiny dancing points of light on the surrounding stones. You stand by the fountain for a while, feeling the cool mist on your face, watching the play of light on the water, and then you continue on your way. Further along the path, you come to a section of the garden where old stone benches are placed at intervals under the shade of plane trees. The trees are large and old, their trunks mottled with patches of pale bark and dark bark, their broad leaves casting a dappled shade that shifts and moves with the breeze. The benches are occupied by a scattering of people, each lost in their own quiet pursuits. An old man in a worn velvet cap sits at one end of a bench, his hands folded on the head of a walking stick, his eyes half closed against the dappled light. He is feeding the pigeons from a small paper bag, scattering crumbs onto the gravel in front of him, and the birds cluster around his feet with soft, throaty coos. A young nun in a white habit sits on another bench, her hands resting on a small prayer book that lies open on her lap, though her eyes are not on the page but on the distant blue line of the lagoon, visible through a gap in the cypresses. A gardener in a straw hat is slowly trimming the box hedge with a pair of shears, the blades making a rhythmic snick-snick sound as they close, and the smell of cut leaves drifts across the path, green and sharp. You find an empty bench near the far end of the garden, a simple stone seat with a curved back that looks out over a small lawn towards the lagoon. The water is visible from here as a strip of brilliant blue, dotted with the dark shapes of boats, and the horizon is a soft haze where the sea meets the sky. You sit down, the stone cool through your clothes, and you place the commonplace book on the bench beside you, close enough that it almost touches your thigh. Then you settle yourself to wait, opening the book at a random page and letting your eyes drift over the words without really reading them. The waiting is not tense, it is simply a rest in a pleasant place, an interlude of calm in the middle of the day. You watch the bees moving among the clover on the lawn, their bodies golden and furry, their buzzing a low, steady hum. You watch the clouds drifting across the blue, their shape slowly transforming from one thing to another, a ship, a mountain, a fish, and then something else entirely. You listen to the distant bells of a church striking the hour, their notes carrying across the garden and fading into the rustle of the leaves. The morning passes in this way, a slow, gentle slide of minutes that run together like water. At some point you become aware of a presence at the other end of the bench. A woman has seated herself there, and you did not hear her approach, so quiet were her footsteps on the gravel. She is dressed in the dark, plain clothing of a widow, her dress of black wool and her head covered by a black veil that falls to her shoulders and shadows her face. Her hands are folded in her lap, and beside her on the bench she has placed a small basket of woven reed, the kind that women carry to market. The basket is half covered with a white cloth, and you can see the tops of some vegetables inside, the green fronds of carrots, the pale curve of a turnip. She does not look at you, and you do not look at her. There is no acknowledgement between you beyond the simple fact of sharing a bench in a public garden. She sits still and quiet, her posture straight but not rigid, and she seems to be looking out at the lagoon, her face turned towards the water. The moment stretches out, calm and unhurried. A dove lands on the gravel near your feet, its pink feet scratching at the small stones, and it eyes you with one bright orange-rimmed eye before pecking at something invisible in the gravel. The gardener's shears continue their rhythmic snipping further down the path. The fountain trickles its endless liquid song. You turn a page of the commonplace book, the paper rustling softly, and you let your gaze drift across the handwritten notes of a previous owner, a mix of Latin proverbs and recipes for ink. Then, with a movement as natural as adjusting your seat, you slide the book a few inches along the bench so that it now rests in the space between you and the woman. You leave it there, your hand returning to your lap, and you continue to look out at the lagoon, your expression placid and unreadable. Time continues its slow flow. The woman does not move for a while, and then, without any haste, she reaches out and takes the book, lifting it gently from the bench and placing it into her basket. The movement is smooth and unremarkable, the kind of action that anyone might make in picking up their own possession. She covers the book with the white cloth, hiding it among the vegetables, and then she rises from the bench. Her departure is as quiet as her arrival. She simply stands and walks away down the gravel path, her black veil stirring slightly in the breeze, her soft shoes making a faint crunching sound that fades into the general noise of the garden. You do not watch her go. Your eyes remain on the lagoon, on the distant sails that are white triangles against the blue, and you feel the quiet satisfaction of a task completed without a word being spoken. The drop is done. You remain on the bench for a while longer, not out of any need, but simply because the garden invites you to stay. The sun has moved higher, and the shadow of the plane tree has shifted so that the bench is now in full sunlight, the warmth soaking into your shoulders and the top of your head. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the sun play red and gold against your eyelids, and you listen to the layered sounds of the garden, the bees, the water, the doves, the distant murmur of the city, all blending into a tapestry of calm. A light breeze stirs the leaves of the plane tree, and you feel it on your face, cool against the warmth of the sun. It is a moment of perfect stillness, a small pause in the hidden work that you do, and you let it stretch out without thought or concern. After a time, you open your eyes and stand up from the bench, your legs slightly stiff from sitting. You walk back along the gravel path, past the fountain with its stone lion and its shimmering pool, past the lavender bed where the butterfly has been joined by a second one, their pale yellow wings flashing in the sun. The old man on the bench has fallen asleep, his chin on his chest, the empty paper bag crumpled in his hand. The pigeons have scattered, and a single grey feather lies on the gravel where they had been. The young nun has gone, and the bench where she sat is now occupied by a mother with a small child, a boy in a white smock who is pointing at the doves with a chubby finger and laughing a high, bright laugh. You walk past them all, your empty hands swinging gently at your sides, and you pass through the archway gate and back into the stone city. The streets feel different after the garden, harder and brighter, the sun reflecting off the plaster walls and the canals glittering with light. But you carry the garden's calm with you, a quiet center that remains as you walk back through the twisting alleys towards the Rialto. You buy an orange from a fruit seller near the herbaria, its skin cool and dimpled, and you eat it as you walk, the juice sweet and sharp on your tongue. The peel you drop into the canal, where it floats for a moment before a small fish rises to investigate, and then vanishes. The day is wearing on towards afternoon, and the scriptorium will be waiting with its tallow candles and its scratching quills. But for now, you are simply a man walking through a city, carrying nothing but the memory of a garden and the taste of an orange on his lips. By the time you reach the bookseller's shop, the sun is beginning its slow descent towards the western lagoon, and the shadows are lengthening once more. You climb the spiral staircase to your room, the cool darkness welcoming you after the bright streets, and you sit on the stool by the desk without lighting a candle. The high window shows the familiar strip of sky, now a deeper blue, and you watch the clouds drift for a while, your mind as calm and empty as the surface of a still canal. The drop is complete, the message passed, and the chain continues its quiet, invisible work. You think about the woman in the widow's veil, about the way her hand closed over the book, about the basket with its carrots and turnips, and then you let the thought go, releasing it like a leaf onto moving water. There is nothing more to do until the next message arrives, and so you sit in the dim room, listening to the distant bells and the soft lap of water, and you let the afternoon drift slowly towards evening. The rain began in the night, a soft, persistent sound on the tiled roof that seeped into your dreams and colored them gray and silver. By the time you woke and lit the morning candle, the high window showed only a blur of wetness, the rooftops across the canal indistinct behind a veil of falling water. The sound of the rain was everywhere, a steady, gentle hiss that wrapped the room in a blanket of white noise, muffling the usual morning sounds of the city. You went about your routine with the same slow care as always, splashing water onto your face, eating your bread and cheese, drinking the watered wine. But the rain added a layer of calm to everything, a cool, damp presence that made the small room feel even more like a sanctuary. You dressed in your plain woolen doublet, pulled on your soft leather shoes, and prepared for the walk to the scriptorium, taking your cloak from its peg and drawing the hood up before stepping out into the wet alley. The rain was not a storm, only a steady, gentle fall, the kind of rain that can last all day and into the night, and the city seemed to huddle under it, the streets emptier than usual, the canals dimpled with a million tiny circles that spread and vanished. You walked with your head slightly bowed, the hood channeling the water away from your face, and the sound of the rain on the cobbles and the rooftops was a constant soothing backdrop. By the time you reached the scriptorium and pushed open the heavy oak door, the damp had seeped into the wool of your cloak, and the air inside the long room was noticeably warmer, heated by the tallow candles that were already burning at every desk. The familiar smells of ink and old paper and burning tallow were joined today by the clean, mineral scent of wet stone, a cool note that cut through the warmth and made the room feel fresh despite the smoky candles. You hung your dripping cloak on a peg near the door and took your seat at the third desk on the left. The high windows near the ceiling were dark today, the sky beyond them, a uniform pale grey that gave no sense of the hour, and the candlelight seemed more golden by contrast, each flame a small steady sun that pushed back the rainy dimness. Niccolo the apprentice was already at his desk, his thin face lit from below by his candle as he practiced his capitals, and Maestro Bertucci was in his chair near the supply table, a woolen shawl draped over his shoulders and a cup of something hot steaming beside him. The room was quiet except for the scratch of quills and the rain on the roof, a sound that filled the spaces between the other sounds and softened them, blending everything into a continuous gentle murmur. Today your work was not the copying of documents, but the illumination of one, a task that came to you only occasionally and that you approached with a particular quiet pleasure. The senior notary had left the document on your desk the evening before, a large sheet of vellum on which a legal contract had already been written out in a neat Gothic hand. The text was a marriage agreement between two minor noble families, and it was to be adorned with an illuminated initial, a large capital letter at the beginning of the first paragraph, surrounded by a decorative border of vinework and flowers. The contract itself was unremarkable, but the illumination would transform it into an object of beauty, something worthy of the families who would sign it and keep it in their archives for generations. You had gathered the materials before sitting down: a small ceramic palette, a pot of gesso, a square of gold leaf sandwiched between thin paper, a fine brush made of sable hair, a larger brush for laying the gesso, a small agate burnisher shaped like a dog's tooth, and the precious pigment of lapis lazuli, a tiny mound of deep blue powder that you would ground yourself from a small piece of the stone, using a mortar and pestle until it was as fine as dust. You began by preparing the area of the vellum that would receive the gold leaf. The capital letter was an L, its shape already lightly sketched in pencil by the scribe who had written the text, and you would fill the letter with gold and surround it with a field of deep blue, the two colors complementing each other in the traditional manner. Using the larger brush, you applied a thin layer of gesso to the interior of the L, the gesso a white, clay-like substance mixed with a little sugar to give it the right consistency. The brush moved in smooth, even strokes, leaving a slightly raised surface that would support the gold and give it a three-dimensional luster. The gesso was cool and smooth, and you worked it into every corner of the letter, the brush tip tracing the curves and the sharp serifs with the same precision you would use in writing. When the gesso was laid, you sat back and let it dry for a while, the rain filling the pores with its gentle, endless rhythm. The gesso changed color as it dried, from wet white to a matte, chalky finish, and you tested it with the tip of your finger, feeling the slight roughness that would hold the gold. Now came the delicate work of applying the gold leaf. You took the small square of gold from its paper wrapping, the leaf so thin that it was lighter than a feather and threatened to float away on the slightest breath. The gold shimmered in the candlelight, a warm, rich yellow that seemed to glow from within, and you handled it with the care of someone lifting a butterfly wing. You positioned the leaf over the gessoed letter, using a soft brush to guide it down, and you pressed it gently into place with a pad of clean silk. The gold adhered to the gesso, the raised surface molding the leaf to the shape of the letter, and you used the silk pad to burnish it in slow, circular motions, polishing the gold until it gleamed with a deep, mirror-like shine. The burnishing took time, your hand moving in the same small circles over and over, the silk whispering against the gold, and gradually the letter L transformed from a dull yellow shape into a brilliant reflective surface that caught the candlelight and threw it back in a warm glow. With the gold laid and burnished, you turned your attention to the background of the letter. You took the small mound of lapis lazuli powder and mixed it with a few drops of gum arabic and water on the ceramic palette, stirring with the tip of the sable brush until the mixture became a smooth, thick paste. The color was extraordinary, a deep velvety blue that seemed to absorb the light and hold it, the color of the night sky when the stars are at their brightest. You loaded the fine brush with the blue paint and began to fill the space around the gold letter, the brush moving in tiny, controlled strokes that followed the contours of the L. The paint flowed smoothly from the brush, covering the vellum with an even, opaque layer, and you worked with a steady hand, the concentration narrowing your world to the small rectangle of vellum and the blue pigment spreading across it. The rain on the roof was a soft, constant presence, a white noise that filled your ears and emptied your mind of everything except the work. After the blue background was complete, you began the vine work that would surround the letter. This was the most intricate part of the illumination, a delicate tracery of stems and leaves and small flowers that would fill the margin of the document with a border of living green. You mixed a green pigment from malachite, a soft, earthy green that contrasted with the deep blue, and you used a quill with a very fine nib to draw the curling stems. The quill scratched softly as it moved, the lines flowing from your hand in graceful spirals and loops, and you added tiny leaves at intervals, each one a single precise stroke of the brush. The leaves were shaped like teardrops, and you painted them in pairs, a darker green for the shadow and a lighter green for the light, giving them a subtle depth. Time passed without your notice. The candle burned down, and you replaced it with a fresh one, the new flame joining the others, and you continued to work, your back bent slightly, your eyes focused on the tiny world taking shape under your hand. Into the vine work you now wove the hidden message. This was a technique you had used before, a way of encoding information into the decorative elements of a document so that it could be read only by someone who knew the cipher. The system was simple. Certain flowers had been assigned to certain letters of the alphabet, a code that you kept in your memory alone. A rose meant one letter, a lily another, a violet a third, and so on through a list of common garden flowers. By placing these flowers in a specific sequence along the border, you could spell out a word or a name, the blooms looking to all the world like a purely ornamental choice. Today you needed to embed the name of a street in the San Polo district, the street where a new contact had arrived and where a future meeting would take place. The name was short, only 2 words, and you worked the flowers into the vine work with the same care as the rest. A tiny rosebud here, a violet there, a sprig of jasmine, a marigold with its ruffled orange petals rendered in a speck of red and yellow paint. Each flower was no larger than a fingernail, and you painted them with the tip of the sable brush, your breath slow and controlled so that your hand would not shake. It was during the painting of one of these tiny flowers, a lily with its white petals and pale yellow center, that you made the error. The lily required a thin stroke of white paint for the petal's edge, and your brush, perhaps overloaded with pigment, slipped by the smallest of margins, extending a serif on the adjacent vine leaf by a hair's breadth beyond its intended line. The error was minuscule, a tiny, almost invisible extension of green that marred the crisp edge of the leaf, but you saw it immediately, your eye attuned to the smallest deviation. There was no frustration, no inward curse or tightening of the jaw. You simply paused, the brush held motionless above the vellum, and you looked at the mistake with calm, appraising eyes. The error was there, a small imperfection in the otherwise flawless border, and you knew it could be corrected with patience and a steady hand. You set the brush down on the palette and took up the small penknife, its blade thin and sharp, its handle of bone worn smooth from use. You angled the blade so that its edge caught the candlelight, and you brought it down to the vellum with the lightest of touches, the tip just grazing the surface. The correction began with a gentle scraping, the blade moving back and forth in tiny controlled motions that lifted the misplaced green pigment from the vellum's surface. The sound was a soft, rhythmic scratching, barely audible beneath the rain, and you worked with the patience of someone who has all the time in the world. The green paint came away in tiny dust-like flakes, revealing the creamy vellum beneath, and you stopped frequently to blow the dust away with a soft breath, clearing the area so you could see the progress. The scraping took many minutes, for you removed only the thinnest layer each time, careful not to damage the vellum surface or to disturb the neighboring strokes. When the error had been completely scraped away, leaving only a faint, pale spot where the paint had been, you took the agate burnisher from the table. The burnisher was a smooth, polished stone, shaped like a small, curved tooth, and used it to polish the scraped area, rubbing it in small, gentle circles over the spot. The burnishing compressed the fibers of the vellum, restoring its smooth texture and preparing it to receive new paint, and the sound it made was a soft, silky whisper, the stone gliding over the surface with a frictionless ease. Under the burnisher, the pale spot gradually blended with the surrounding vellum until it was almost invisible, a faint ghost of a mark that would disappear entirely under a fresh layer of pigment. Now you took up the brush again, mixing a fresh dot of green on the palette to match the exact shade of the vine leaf, and you repainted the serif with a single, precise stroke, this time stopping exactly at the correct point. You held your breath as the brush moved, and when you lifted it, the leaf was perfect, its edge crisp and clean, the error corrected as if it had never been. You sat back on the stool and let out a long, slow breath, the tension of the correction flowing out of your shoulders and into the rain-scented air. The whole process had taken perhaps half an hour, though it felt both longer and shorter, a quiet meditation on care and craft that had absorbed you entirely. You continued with the border, adding the remaining flowers in their coded sequence, each bloom a small jewel of color against the green vinework. A tiny forget-me-not with petals of the palest blue, a primrose in soft yellow, a sprig of rosemary with its needle-like leaves rendered in short, fine strokes of dark green. The hidden message grew flower by flower, the name of the street encoded in the silent language of the garden, and by the time you added the last petal, the border was complete. It was a beautiful thing, the gold letter L gleaming at its center, the deep blue background rich as the evening sky, the vinework curling around the margins in graceful loops, the flowers scattered along the stems like jewels. No one who looked at it would see anything but a splendid piece of illumination, a work of art to adorn a noble family's contract. The hidden message was invisible, buried in plain sight among the petals and leaves. You cleaned your brushes in a small jar of turpentine, the liquid clear and sharp-smelling, its pungent, clean scent mixing with the wet stone smell of the rain. You swirled the sable brush in the turpentine, watching the blue and green pigments dissolve and drift away in cloudy spirals, and then you wiped the bristles gently on a soft rag until they were clean and dry. The larger brush you cleaned as well, the gesso washing out with a few swirls, and you laid both brushes flat on the desk to dry. The palette you wiped clean with a corner of the rag, the ceramic surface returning to its pale, unblemished state, and you closed the pots of pigment and the jar of turpentine, setting everything back in its place. The rain had lessened while you worked, the steady downpour softening to a light drizzle that pattered gently on the tiles, and the high windows were now a shade lighter, the grey sky beginning to thin towards evening. The other scribes were stirring, their workday nearing its end, and the sound of quills being laid down and stools scraping back filled the room. Niccolo was covering his inkpot, his alphabet practice finished, and Maestro Bertucci was folding his shawl and rising from his chair with a series of small groans. You looked down at the illuminated document one last time, the gold catching the candlelight and winking back at you, and then you covered it with a sheet of clean paper to protect it until it could be delivered to the notary. The hidden message would be read by the one who needed to read it, and the contract would be signed and witnessed, and the quiet chain of information would continue its invisible passage through the city. You rose from your stool, your back and shoulders stiff from the hours of bent concentration, and you stretched your arms above your head, feeling the pleasant pull of tired muscles. You took your cloak from the peg, the wool still slightly damp but warm from the room, and you swung it around your shoulders, drawing the hood up. The scriptorium emptied slowly, the other men filing out into the drizzle, their voices low and their footsteps soft on the wet stones. You followed them, pausing at the door to look back at the room, where the candles still burned at the few desks, their flames steady and golden in the dimness. Then you stepped out into the rain-washed street, the air cool and fresh on your face, and you walked home through the quiet alleys. The hidden message carried not in your pocket, but in your memory, a small, silent thing that would wait until it was needed. The city was washed clean by the rain, the canals brimming, the stones dark and glistening, and you moved through it as you always did, a quiet man returning home at the end of a day's careful work. The night is deep and still when you push open the side door of the bookseller's shop and step into the alley, the last candle of the story burning in its tin lantern at your side. The rain has stopped, the clouds thinning and drifting apart to reveal a sky that is clear and dark and scattered with stars, and the air is fresh and cool, washed clean by the long hours of steady fall. The cobbles underfoot are still wet, their surfaces glistening faintly in the lantern light, and the sound of water dripping from eaves and gutters is everywhere, a soft, irregular music that fills the silence between your footsteps. You walk slowly through the familiar alleys, the lantern swinging gently with your stride, and you feel the quiet of the city around you like a physical presence, a deep, velvety stillness that has settled over the rooftops and the canals and the sleeping houses. Your path tonight has no hidden purpose, no message to deliver or collect. The chain is complete for now, the last encoded flower painted, the the last printed sheet passed along, the last sealed tube accepted from a stranger's hand in a forgotten courtyard. You have done all that was required of you in this cycle, and the night is yours to spend in whatever quiet way you choose. So you walk, not towards any particular destination, but simply through the city, letting your feet carry you along the routes that have become as familiar as the lines on your own palm. You pass the shrine with its Madonna, the fresh rosebud now replaced by a sprig of rosemary. You pass the wellhead with its carved lions, their stone faces wet and gleaming. You cross the small wooden bridge where you stood so many nights ago, and you pause at its center, looking down at the dark water that moves slowly beneath, carrying a few fallen leaves and a single floating feather towards the lagoon. The water whispers against the stone foundations, a sound so constant and gentle that it seems to be the city's own breathing, a soft, endless rhythm that has continued for centuries and will continue for centuries more. After a time, you turn away from the bridge and continue your walk, the lantern beam picking out the familiar textures of the city, the damp brick walls, the iron-studded doors, the small dark windows with their shutters closed. A cat watches you from a doorstep, its eyes two pale moons in the lantern light, and then it blinks slowly and turns away, curling into a tighter ball. The air is cold enough that you can see your breath, and you draw the cloak closer around your shoulders, the wool soft and warm against your neck. The stars overhead are very bright, the clouds having cleared entirely, and you can see the constellations wheeling slowly above the rooftops, Cassiopeia's tilted throne, the steady light of the North Star, the scattered diamonds of the Pleiades. The moon has not yet risen, and the starlight is enough to cast faint shadows on the ground, pale and soft-edged, so that you walk in a world of silver and deep blue and the warm gold of your lantern. You walk for a long time, perhaps an hour, perhaps more, and gradually your path curves back towards the bookseller's shop. The alleys open and close around you, the bridges rise and fall under your feet, the canals glitter on your left and your right. You do not hurry, there is no reason to hurry. The night will last as long as it lasts, and when it is over the day will come with its quiet work and its hidden messages. But for now there is only the walking and the stillness and the gentle light of the lantern that bobs beside you like a faithful companion. At last you reach the familiar side door and let yourself in, the latch clicking softly behind you, and you climb the spiral staircase to your room, your legs tied in a pleasant, comfortable way. The room is dark and cool, the high window showing the stars you have just walked under, and you set the lantern on the desk without extinguishing its flame. This is the last candle, and you will let it burn a while longer. You hang your cloak on its peg, the wool releasing the cold scent of the night air, and you sit down on the stool by the desk, settling yourself with a long, slow exhale. The candle in the lantern is a stub now, its wax pooled around the wick, the flame burning low and steady. You open the little door of the lantern and lift the candle out, placing it in the brass holder that sits at the center of the desk. The room is transformed by this single small light. The shadows gather in the corners, soft and deep, and the surfaces of your few possessions glow with a warm golden hue. The inkpot, the quills in their cup, the clay ash pot, the stack of paper, the small knife with its bone handle. These are the objects of your quiet life, the tools of your hidden trade, and in the candlelight they look somehow both ordinary and precious, as if the flame has given them a quiet significance that the daylight never reveals. You take the plain account book from the shelf above the desk, a small volume bound in undyed linen with the word ledger stamped on the spine. This is your other book, the one that contains no cipher and no secret, only the simple record of your daily expenses and income, the small transactions that make up a life. You open it to the most recent page, where your own neat hand has recorded the purchases and earnings of the past week. A quire of paper, bought from the stationer near San Giacomo, cost 5 soldi. A repair to the sole of your left shoe, done by the old cobbler in the alley, cost 2 soldi. A small wheel of hard cheese from the market cost 1 soldo. You run your finger down the columns of figures, the numbers small and precise, and you add a new entry, a bunch of dried lavender, bought for 1 soldo, now hanging from a nail by the window. The entry is trivial, mundane, a record of nothing more than a simple purchase, and yet there is a quiet satisfaction in writing it down, in seeing the small facts of your life arranged in orderly columns. The account book is a kind of proof, a document that confirms your existence as an ordinary man, a copyist with modest needs and modest means. If anyone ever looked at it, they would see nothing else. You close the ledger and return it to the shelf, and then you sit for a while doing nothing at all, your hands resting loosely on the desk, your eyes on the candle flame. The flame is a living thing, a small bright dancer that sways and flickers in the imperceptible draughts that move through the room. It is never entirely still. It always moves, leaning slightly to one side and then the other. Its edges are pale gold that deepens to a core of brilliant white. The wick is a dark thread rising from the pool of wax, and it glows red at its tip where the fire consumes it. The wax is translucent in the heat, a clear amber liquid that surrounds the wick and then cools and hardens further out, forming a rim that holds the pool in place. As you watch, a single drop of wax overflows the rim and slides slowly down the side of the candle, leaving a smooth, glistening trail that hardens into a solid white drip. The drop reaches the brass holder and pools there, adding to the accumulation of previous drips that have built up over many nights of burning. The candle is now perhaps a third of its original length, and it will not last much longer, but for now it burns with a steady, unwavering light, and you let your gaze rest on it, without thought, your mind as calm and empty as the surface of a still canal. The sounds of the room are few and soft. The candle makes a faint hissing sound, the wick drawing the liquid wax upward into the flame. Somewhere in the wall, a tiny scratching sound suggests a mouse moving through its hidden passage, a fellow inhabitant of this old building who comes out at night to explore the quiet spaces. Through the high window, you can hear the gentle lap of water in the canal, a sound that has been the background of your life in Venice, as constant as the beating of your own heart. The water never stops. It is always moving, always touching the stones, a quiet liquid presence that connects every part of the city. You listen to it now with a kind of deep attention, letting the sound fill your ears and your mind, pushing away any stray thoughts that might drift in. The water is a lullaby, a gentle, rhythmic sound that has soothed the sleep of Venetians for 1,000 years, and it soothes you now, settling into your bones like a warmth. You stretch your hands out on the desk, feeling the slight ache in your fingers from the day's work, the delicate painting of the vine work and the tiny flowers. The ache is not unpleasant. It is the reminder of labor well done, of care and attention given to small things. You flex your fingers slowly, watching the tendons move under the skin, and then you rest them again, palms down on the cool wood. Your gaze drifts from the candle to the window, where the stars are still bright in the narrow rectangle of sky. The moon has begun to rise now, a thin crescent that edges above the rooftops and casts a pale silver light into the room, competing with the gold of the candle. The two lights meet on the desk, the cold silver and the warm gold, and they blend into a soft, pearlescent glow that illuminates the grain of the wood and the faint ink stains that mark its surface. You think about the day that has passed, the rain and the scriptorium and the tiny error on the vine leaf, corrected with such patience. You think about the woman in the widow's veil, the way she took the book from the bench without a word, and about the hand that reached through the gap in the courtyard wall, offering the sealed tube. You think about the market and the old herb seller, about the scriptorium and Maestro Bertucci dozing in his chair, about Niccolo the apprentice and his serious face and his tongue poking from the corner of his mouth. These people are part of your quiet world, the threads that weave together to form the fabric of your hidden life, and yet you know almost nothing about them, and they know almost nothing about you. You are all strangers passing in the dim streets, connected only by the small silent exchanges that make up the chain. The thought is not lonely or sad. It is simply the way things are, a fact as neutral as the water in the canals or the stars in the sky. The candle burns lower, the flame now level with the rim of the holder, the pool of wax deep and trembling. The light in the room has grown dimmer. the shadows advancing from the corners, and the silver moonlight seems brighter by contrast, falling in a pale rectangle on the floorboards near the window. You know that the candle will soon burn out, and you feel no urge to replace it. The night is far advanced, and sleep is beginning to tug at your eyelids, a gentle weight that makes your blinks longer and your breathing slower. You have completed the cycle, walked the alleys, passed the messages, painted the hidden flowers, and now there is nothing left to do but let the day end and the night take you. You reach out and touch the account book one last time, your fingers resting on the worn linen cover, and then you withdraw your hand. You take the small knife from the desk and trim a tiny piece of frayed thread from the cuff of your doublet, a small act of tidiness that satisfies some quiet part of your mind. You blow the thread from your fingers, watching it drift down to the floor and disappear into the shadows. Then you set the knife back in its place and fold your hands on the desk, your posture relaxed and easy. The candle flame flickers once, a sudden bright flare that makes the shadows jump, and then it steadies again, burning with a last, concentrated brightness. You watch it, your eyes half closed, and you feel the deep, quiet peace of the room settling over you like a blanket. The water in the canal is still there, still lapping, still breathing. The stars are still there, still burning, still wheeling through their slow, eternal dance. The city is still there, its thousands of sleeping souls, its stones and its bridges and its dark flowing canals. And you are here, a quiet man in a quiet room, with nothing to hide and nothing to fear and nothing to do but close your eyes and drift away. You lean forward and blow out the candle with a single, soft breath. The flame vanishes, and a thin trail of smoke rises from the wick, curling upward and then dispersing into the darkness. The room falls into a deep, velvety black, the moonlight too faint to illuminate more than the ghostly outline of the window. The smell of warm wax and burnt wick fills the air, a scent that you have come to associate with the end of every day, the final marker of the boundary between waking and sleep. You rise from the stool, your body moving through the familiar darkness with the memory of the room's shape, and you find the bed with your outstretched hand. The straw mattress rustles softly as you lie down, the wool blanket pulled up to your chin, and you turn on your side so that you can see the high window and the thin crescent of the moon and the single bright star that hangs just above the rooftops. The sound of the water in the canal is clearer now, without the candle to distract your ears, and you let it fill your mind, a soft, liquid rhythm that washes away the last fragments of thought. The water laps against the stone, pauses, laps again, a cycle as old as the city itself, a cycle that has no beginning and no end. You listen to it as your breathing slows and deepens, your body sinking into the mattress, your muscles releasing their last hold on the day. The city sleeps around you, the dark canals winding through the dark streets, the bridges arching over the silent water, the boats rocking gently at their moorings. The messages are delivered, the chain is at rest, and you are simply a man falling asleep in a room above a bookseller's shop, with the sea at the edges of the city and the stars overhead and the gentle, endless lapping of the water against the stones. Your eyes close, the moonlight a faint silver glow against your eyelids, and the last thing you hear is the quiet voice of the canal, whispering its ancient lullaby to the stones, to the city, to you. The story drifts into silence, the room enfolds you in its darkness, and sleep comes as softly and as deeply as the water moving through the heart of Venice.